Gran looked thunderstruck. Even Pip had no words to say to that, and Pip had words for everything. What sort of man would proclaim himself a coward? Samuel Tarly must have read their thoughts on their faces. His eyes met John's and darted away, quick as frightened animals. I'm sorry, he said. I don't mean to be like I am. He walked heavily toward the armory. John called after him. You were hurt, he said. Tomorrow you'll do better. Sam looked mournfully back over one shoulder. No, I won't, he said, blinking back tears. I never do better. When he was gone, Gran frowned. Nobody likes cravens, he said uncomfortably. I wish we hadn't helped him. What if they think we're craven too? You're too stupid to be craven, Pip told him. I'm not, Gran said. Yes, you are. If a bear attacked you in the woods, you'd be too stupid to run away. I would not, Gran insisted. I'd run away faster than you. He stopped suddenly, scowling when he saw Pip's grin and realized what he'd just said. His thick neck flushed a dark red. John left him there arguing as he returned to the armory, hung up his sword and stripped off his battered armor. Life at Castle Black followed certain patterns. The mornings were for swordplay, the afternoons for work. The Black brothers set new recruits too many different tasks to learn where their skills lay. John cherished the rare afternoons when he was sent out with Ghost, ranging at his side to bring back game for the Lord Commander's table, but for every day spent hunting, he gave a dozen to Donal Noy in the armory, spinning the whetstone while the one-armed smith sharpened axes grown dull from use, or pumping the bellows as Noy hammered out a new sword. Other times he ran messages, stood at guard, marked out stables, fletched arrows, assisted Master Aemon with his birds, or Bowen Marsh with his counts and inventories. That afternoon, the watch commander sent him to the winch cage with 4 barrels of fresh crushed stone to scatter gravel over the icy footpaths atop the wall. It was lonely and boring work, even with Ghost along for company, but John found he did not mind. On a clear day you could see half the world from top of the wall, and the air was always cold and bracing. He could think here, and he found himself thinking of Samwell Tarly, and, oddly, of Tyrion Lannister. He wondered what Tyrion would have made of the fat boy. Most men would rather deny a hard truth than face it, the dwarf had told him, grinning. The world was full of cravens who pretended to be heroes. It took a queer sort of courage to admit to cowardice as Samwell Tarly had. His sore shoulder made the work go slowly. It was late afternoon before John finished graveling the paths. He lingered on high to watch the sun go down, turning the western sky the color of blood. Finally, as dusk was settling over the north, John rolled the empty barrels back into the cage and signaled the winchman to lower him. The evening meal was almost done by the time he and Ghost reached the common hall. A group of the Black brothers were dicing over mulled wine near the fire. His friends were at the bench nearest the west wall, laughing. Pip was in the middle of a story. The mama's boy with the big ears was a born liar with 100 different voices, and he did not tell his tales so much as live them, playing all the parts as needed, a king one moment and a swineherd the next. When he turned into an alehouse girl or a virgin princess, he used a high falsetto voice that reduced them all to tears of helpless laughter, and his eunuchs were always eerily accurate caricatures of Sir Alistair. John took as much pleasure from Pip's antics as anyone, yet that night he turned away and went instead to the end of the bench, where Samwell Tarly sat alone, as far from the others as he could get. He was finishing the last of the pork pie the cooks had served up for supper when John sat down across from him. The fat boy's eyes widened at the sight of Ghost. "Is that a wolf?" "A dire wolf," John said. "His name is Ghost. The dire wolf is the sigil of my father's house." "Ours is a striding huntsman," Samwell Tarly said. "Do you like to hunt?" The fat boy shuddered. "I hate it." He looked as though he was going to cry again. "What's wrong now?" John asked him. "Why are you always so frightened?" Sam stared at the last of his pork pie and gave a feeble shake of his head, too scared even to talk. A burst of laughter filled the hall. John heard Pip squeaking in a high voice. He stood. Let's go outside." The round fat face looked up at him, suspicious. "Why? What will we do outside?" "Talk," John said. "Have you seen the wall?" "I'm fat, not blind," Samuel Tarly said. "Of course I saw it. It's 700 feet high." Yet he stood up all the same, wrapped the fur-linen cloak over his shoulders, and followed John from the common hall, still wary, as if he suspected some cruel trick was waiting for him in the night. Ghost padded along beside them. "I never thought it would be like this," Sam said as they walked, his words steaming in the cold air. Already he was huffing and puffing as he tried to keep up. "All the buildings are falling down, and it's so cold." A hard frost was settling over the castle, and John could hear the soft crunch of grey weeds beneath his boots. Sam nodded miserably. "I hate the cold," he said. "Last night I woke up in the dark and the fire had gone out and I was certain I was going to freeze to death by morning." "It must have been warmer where you come from." "I never saw snow until last month. We were crossing the Barrowlands, me and the men my father sent to see me north, and this white stuff began to fall like a soft rain. At first I thought it was beautiful, like feathers drifting from the sky, but it kept on and on, until I was frozen to the bone. The men had crusts of snow in their beards and more on their shoulders, and still it kept coming. I was afraid it would never end." John smiled. The wall loomed before them, glimmering palely in the light of the half moon. In the sky above, the stars burned clear and sharp. "Are they going to make me go up there?" Sam asked. His face curdled like old milk as he looked at the great wooden stairs. "I'll die if I have to climb that." "There's a winch," John said, pointing. "They can draw you up in a cage." Samuel Tarly sniffled. "I don't like high places." It was too much. John frowned, incredulous. "Are you afraid of everything?" he asked. "I don't understand. If you're truly so craven, why are you here? Why would a coward want to join the Night's Watch?" Samuel Tarly looked at him for a long moment, and his round face seemed to cave in on itself. He sat down on the frost-covered ground and began to cry, huge choking sobs that made his whole body shake. Jon Snow could only stand and watch. Like the snowfall on the Barrowlands, it seemed the tears would never end. It was Ghost who knew what to do. Silent as shadow, the pale dire wolf moved closer and began to lick the warm tears off Samuel Tarly's face. The fat boy cried out, startled, and somehow, in a heartbeat, his sobs turned to laughter. Jon Snow laughed with him. Afterward they sat on the frozen ground, huddled in their cloaks with Ghost between them. Jon told the story of how he and Robb had found the pups newborn in the late summer snows. It seemed 1,000 years ago now. Before long he found himself talking of Winterfell. "Sometimes I dream about it," he said. "I'm walking down this long empty hall. My voice echoes all around, but no one answers, so I walk faster, opening doors, shouting names. I don't even know who I'm looking for. Most nights it's my father, but sometimes it's Robb instead, or my little sister Arya, or my uncle." The thought of Benjen Stark saddened him. His uncle was still missing. The old bear had sent out rangers in search of him. Sir Jeremy Ricker had led 2 sweeps, and Quarren Halfhand had gone forth from the Shadow Tower, but they'd found nothing aside from a few blazes in the trees that his uncle had left to mark his way. In the stony highlands to the northwest, the marks stopped abruptly, and all trace of Ben Stark vanished. "Do you ever find anyone in your dream?" Sam asked. Jon shook his head. "No one. The castle is always empty." He had never told anyone of the dream, and he did not understand why he was telling Sam now, yet somehow it felt good to talk of it. "Even the ravens are gone from the rookery, and the stables are full of bones. That always scares me. I start to run then, throwing open doors, climbing the tower 3 steps at a time, screaming for someone, for anyone. And then I find myself in front of the door to the crypts. It's black inside, and I can see the steps spiraling down. Somehow I know I have to go down there, but I don't want to. I'm afraid of what might be waiting for me. The old kings of winter are down there, sitting on their thrones with stone wolves at their feet and iron swords across their laps, but it's not them I'm afraid of. I scream that I'm not a Stark, that this isn't my place, but it's no good. I have to go anyway. So I start down, feeling the walls as I descend, with no torch to light the way. It gets darker and darker until I want to scream." He stopped, frowning, embarrassed. "That's when I always wake." His skin cold and clammy, shivering in the darkness of his cell. Ghost would leap up beside him, his warmth as comforting as daybreak. He would go back to sleep with his face pressed into the direwolf's shaggy white fur. "Do you dream of Hornhill?" John asked. "No." Sam's mouth grew tight and hard. "I hated it there." He scratched Ghost behind the ear, brooding, and John let the silence breathe. After a long while, Samwell Tarly began to talk, and Jon Snow listened quietly, and learned how it was that a self-confessed coward found himself on the wall. The Tarleys were a family old in honor, bannermen to Mace Tyrell, Lord of Highgarden and Warden of the South. The eldest son of Lord Randall Tarly, Samwell was born heir to rich lands, a strong keep, and a storied two-handed greatsword named Heartsbane, forged of Valyrian steel and passed down from father to son near 500 years. Whatever pride his lord father might have felt at Samwell's birth vanished as the boy grew up plump, soft, and awkward. Sam loved to listen to music and make his own songs, to wear soft velvets, to play in the castle kitchen beside the cooks, drinking in the rich smells as he snitched lemon cakes and blueberry tarts. His passions were books and kittens and dancing, clumsy as he was. But he grew ill at the sight of blood, and wept to see even a chicken slaughtered. A dozen master-at-arms came and went at Hornhill, trying to turn Samwell into the knight his father wanted. The boy was cursed and caned, slapped and starved. One man had him sleep in his chainmail to make him more martial. Another dressed him in his mother's clothing, and paraded him through the bailey to shame him into valor. He only grew fatter and more frightened, until Lord Randall's disappointment turned to anger and then to loathing. One time, Sam confided, his voice dropping from a whisper, 2 men came to the castle, warlocks from Quarth, with white skin and blue lips. They slaughtered a bull aurochs and made me bath in the hot blood, but it didn't make me brave as they'd promised. I got sick and wretched. Father had them scourged. Finally, after 3 girls in as many years, Lady Tarly gave her lord husband a second son. From that day, Lord Randall ignored Sam, devoting all his time to the younger boy, a fierce, robust child more to his liking. Samwell had known several years of sweet peace with his music and his books, until the dawn of his 15th name day, when he had been awakened to find his horse saddled and ready. 3 men-at-arms had escorted him into a wood near Hornhill, where his father was skinning a deer. "You're almost a man grown now, and my heir," Lord Randall Tarly had told his eldest son, his long knife laying bare the carcass as he spoke. "You have given me no cause to disown you, but neither will I allow you to inherit the land and title that should be Dickon's. Heartsbane must go to a man strong enough to wield her, and you are not worthy to touch her hilt. So I have decided that you shall this day announce that you wish to take the Black. You will forsake all claim to your brother's inheritance, and start north before evenfall. If you do not, then on the morrow we shall have a hunt, and somewhere in these woods your horse will stumble, and you will be thrown from the saddle to die. Or so I will tell your mother. She has a woman's heart and finds it in her to cherish even you, and I have no wish to cause her pain. Please do not imagine that it will truly be that easy, should you think to defy me. Nothing would please me more than to hunt you down like the pig you are." His arms were red to the elbow as he laid the skinning knife aside. "So, there is your choice. The Night's Watch?" He reached inside the deer, ripped out its heart and held it in his fist, red and dripping. "Or this?" Sam told the tale in a calm, dead voice, as if it were something that had happened to someone else, not to him. And strangely, John thought, he did not weep, not even once. When he was done, they sat together and listened to the wind for a time. There was no other sound in all the world. Finally, John said, "We should go back to the common hall." "Why?" Sam asked. John shrugged. "There's hot cider to drink, or mulled wine if you prefer. Some nights Darren sings for us if the mood is on him. He was a singer before. Well, not truly, but almost. An apprentice singer." How did he come here? Sam asked. Lord Rowan of Golden Grove found him in a bed with his daughter. The girl was 2 years older, and Darian swears she helped him through her window, but under her father's eye she named it rape, so here he is. When Master Aemon heard him sing, he said his voice was honey poured over thunder. John smiled. Toad sometimes sings too, if you call it singing, drinking songs he learned in his father's wine sink. Pip says his voice is piss poured over a fart. They laughed at that together. I should like to hear them both, Sam admitted, but they would not want me there. His face was troubled. He's going to make me fight again on the morrow, isn't he? He is, John was forced to say. Sam got awkwardly to his feet. I had better try to sleep. He huddled down in his cloak and plodded off. The others were still in the common room when John returned, alone but for Ghost. Where have you been? Pip asked. Talking with Sam, he said. He truly is craven, said Gran. At supper there were still places on the bench when he got his pie, but he was too scared to come sit with us. The Lord of Ham thinks he's too good to eat with the likes of us, suggested Jaren. I saw him eat a pork pie, Toad said, smirking. Do you think it was his brother? He began to make oinking noises. Stop it, John snapped angrily. The other boys fell silent, taken aback by his sudden fury. Listen to me, John said into the quiet, and he told them how it was going to be. Pip backed him, as he'd known he would, but when Halder spoke up it was a pleasant surprise. Gran was anxious at the first, but John knew the words to move him. One by one the rest fell in line. John persuaded some, cajoled some, shamed the others, made threats where threats were required. At the end they had all agreed. All but Rast. You girls do as you please, Rast said. But if Thorn sends me against Lady Piggy, I'm going to slice me off a rasher of bacon. He laughed in John's face and left them there. Hours later, as the castle slept, 3 of them paid a call on his cell. Gran held his arms while Pip sat on his legs. John could hear Rast's rapid breathing as Ghost leapt onto his chest. The direwolf's eyes burned red as embers as his teeth nipped lightly at the soft skin of the boy's throat, just enough to draw blood. Remember, we know where you sleep, John said softly. The next morning John heard Rast tell Albert and Toad how his razor had slipped while he shaved. From that day forth, neither Rast nor any of the others would hurt Samwell Tarly. When Sir Alistair matched them against him, they would stand their ground and swat aside his slow, clumsy strokes. If the master-at-arms screamed for an attack, they would dance in and tap Sam lightly on breastplate or helm or leg. Sir Alistair raged and threatened and called them all cravens and women and worse, yet Sam remained unhurt. A few nights later, at John's urging, he joined them for the evening meal, taking a place on the bench beside Halder. It was another fortnight before he found the nerve to join their talk, but in time he was laughing at Pip's faces and teasing Gran with the best of them. Fat and awkward and frightened he might be, but Samwell Tarly was no fool. One night he visited John in his cell. I don't know what you did, he said, but I know you did it. He looked away shyly. I've never had a friend before. We're not friends, John said. He put a hand on Sam's broad shoulder. We're brothers. And so they were, he thought to himself after Sam had taken his leave. Robb and Bran and Rickon were his father's sons, and he loved them still. Yet John knew that he had never truly been one of them. Catelyn Stark had seen to that. The grey walls of Winterfell might still haunt his dreams, but Castle Black was his life now, and his brothers were Sam and Gran and Halder and Pip and the other cast-outs who wore the black of the Night's Watch. My uncle spoke truly, he whispered to Ghost. He wondered if he would ever see Benjen Stark again to tell him. Chapter 27. Eddard. It's the Hand's tourney that's the cause of all the trouble, my lords, the commander of the City Watch complained to the King's Council. The King's tourney, Ned corrected, wincing. I assure you, the Hand wants no part of it. Call it what you will, my lord. Knights have been arriving from all over the realm, and for every knight we get 2 free riders, 3 craftsmen, 6 men-at-arms, 12 merchants, 24 whores, and more thieves than I dare guess. This cursed heat had half the city in a fever to start, and now with all these visitors. Last night we had a drowning, a tavern riot, 3 knife fights, a rape, 2 fires, robberies beyond count, and a drunken horse race down the street of the Sisters. The night before, a woman's head was found in the Great Sept, floating in the Rainbow Pool. No one seems to know how it got there or who it belongs to." "How dreadful!" Very sad with a shudder. Lord Ranelagh Baratheon was less sympathetic. "If you cannot keep the king's peace, Janos, perhaps the city watch should be commanded by someone who can." Stout, jowly Janos Slynt puffed himself up like an angry frog, his bald plate reddening. "Aegon the Dragon himself could not keep the peace, Lord Renly. I need more men." "How many?" Ned asked, leaning forward. As ever, Robert had not troubled himself to attend the council's session, so it fell to his hand to speak for him. "As many as can be gotten, Lord Hand." "Hire 50 new men," Ned told him. "Lord Baelish will see that you get the coin." "I will?" Littlefinger said. "You will. You found 40,000 golden dragons for a champion's purse. Surely you can scrape together a few coppers to keep the king's peace." Ned turned back to Janos Slynt. "I will also give you 20 good swords from my own household guard, to serve with the watch until the crowds have left." "All thanks, Lord Hand," Slynt said, bowing. "I promise you, they shall be put to good use." When the commander had taken his leave, Eddard Stark turned to the rest of the council. "The sooner this folly is done with, the better I shall like it." As if the expense and trouble were not irksome enough, all and sundry insisted on salting Ned's wound by calling it the Hand's tourney, as if he were the cause of it, and Robert honestly seemed to think he should feel honoured. "The realm prospers from such events, my lord," Grandmaster Pycelle said. "They bring the great the chance of glory, and the lowly a respite from their woes." "And put coins in many a pocket," Littlefinger added. "Every inn in the city is full, and the whores are walking bow-edged and jingling with each step." Lord Renly laughed. "We're fortunate my brother Stannis is not with us. Remember the time he proposed to outlaw brothels? The king asked him if perhaps he'd like to outlaw eating, shitting, and breathing while he was at it. If truth be told, I ofttimes wonder how Stannis ever got that ugly daughter of his. He goes to his marriage bed like a man marching to a battlefield, with a grim look in his eyes and a determination to do his duty." Ned had not joined the laughter. "I wonder about your brother Stannis as well. I wonder when he intends to end his visit to Dragonstone and resume his seat on this council." "No doubt as soon as we've scourged all those whores into the sea," Littlefinger replied, provoking more laughter. "I have heard quite enough about whores for one day," Ned said, rising. "Until tomorrow." Harwin had the door when Ned returned to the Tower of the Hand. "Summon Jory to my chambers and tell your father to saddle my horse," Ned told him, too briskly. "As you say, my lord." The Red Keep and the Hand's tourney were chafing him raw, Ned reflected as he climbed. He yearned for the comfort of Caitlyn's arms, for the sounds of Robb and Jon crossing swords in the practice yard, for the cool days and cold nights of the north. In his chambers he stripped off his council silks and sat for a moment with the book while he waited for Jory to arrive. The lineages and histories of the great houses of the 7 kingdoms, with the sliptions of many high lords and noble ladies and their children, by Grandmaster Melian. Pycelle had spoken truly. It made for ponderous reading. Yet Jon Arryn had asked for it, and Ned felt certain he had reasons. There was something here, some truth buried in these brittle yellow pages, if only he could see it. But what? The tome was over a century old. Scarcely a man now alive had yet been born when Melian had compiled his dusty list of weddings, births, and deaths. He opened to the section on House Lannister once more, and turned the pages slowly, hoping against hope that something would leap out at him. The Lannisters were an old family, tracing their descent back to Len the Clever, a trickster from the Age of Heroes who was no doubt as legendary as Bran the Builder, though far more beloved of singers and tale-tellers. In the songs, Lan was the fellow who winkled the Casterlys out of Casterly Rock with no weapon but his wits, and stole gold from the sun to brighten his curly hair. Ned wished he were here now, to winkle the truth out of his damnable book. A sharp rap on the door heralded Jory Castle. Ned closed Melian's tome and bid him enter. "I've promised to City Watch 20 of my guard until the tourney is done," he told him. "I rely on you to make the choice. Give Ellen the command and make certain the men understand that they are needed to stop fights, not start them." Rising, Ned opened a catered chest and removed a light linen undertunic. "Did you find the stable boy?" "The watchman, my lord," Jory said. "He vows he'll never touch another horse." "What did he have to say?" "He claims he knew Lord Arryn well. Fast friends they were." Jory snorted. "The hand always gave the lads a copper on their name days, he says. Had a way with horses. Never rode his mounts too hard, and brought them carrots and apples, so they were always pleased to see him." "Carrots and apples," Ned repeated. It sounded as if this boy would be even less used than the others, and he was the last of the 4 Littlefinger had turned up. Jory had spoken to each of them in turn. Sir Hugh had been brisk and uninformative, and arrogant as only a new-made knight can be. If the hand wished to talk to him, he should be pleased to receive him, but he would not be questioned by a mere captain of guards, even if said captain was 10 years older and 100 times the swordsman. The serving girl had at least been pleasant. She said Lord John had been reading more than was good for him, that he was troubled at the melancholy of his young son's frailty, and gruff with his lady wife. The potboy, now Cordwainer, had never exchanged so much as a word with Lord John, but he was full of oddments of kitchen gossip. The lord had been quarrelling with the king, the lord only picked at his food, the lord was sending his boy to be fostered on Dragonstone, the lord had taken a great interest in the breeding of hunting hounds, the lord had visited a master armourer to commission a new suit of plate, wrought all in a pale silver with a blue jasper falcon, and a mother-of-pearl moon on the breasts. The king's own brother had gone with him to help choose the design, the potboy said. No, not Lord Renly, the other one, Lord Stannis. Did our watchman recall anything else of note? The lad swears Lord John was as strong as a man half his age. Often went riding with Lord Stannis, he says. Stannis again, Ned thought. He found that curious. Jon Arryn and he had been cordial, but never friendly. And while Robert had been riding north to Winterfell, Stannis had removed himself to Dragonstone, the Targaryen island fastness he had conquered in his brother's name. He had given no word as to when he might return. "Where did they go on these rides?" Ned asked. "The boy says that they visited a brothel." "A brothel," Ned said. "The Lord of the Eyrie and Hand of the King visited a brothel with Stannis Baratheon." He shook his head, incredulous, wondering what Lord Renly would make of this tidbit. Robert's lusts were the subject of ribald drinking songs throughout the realm, but Stannis was a different sort of man. A bare year younger than the king, yet utterly unlike him, stern, humourless, unforgiving, grim in his sense of duty. "The boy insists it's true. The Hand took 3 guardsmen with him, and the boy says they were joking off it when he took their horses afterward." "Which brothel?" Ned asked. The boy did not know. The guards would. "A pity Lysa carried them off to the Vale," Ned said dryly. "The guards are doing their best to vex us. Lady Lysa, Master Colmont, Lord Stannis. Everyone who might actually know the truth of what happened to Jon Arryn is 1,000 leagues away." "Will you summon Lord Stannis back from Dragonstone?" "Not yet," Ned said. "Not until I have a better notion of what this is all about and where he stands." The matter nagged at him. Why did Stannis leave? Had he played some part in Jon Arryn's murder? Or was he afraid? Ned found it hard to imagine what could frighten Stannis Baratheon, who had once held Storm's End through a year of siege, surviving on rats and boot leather while the Lords Tyrell and Redwyne sat outside with their hosts, banqueting in sight of his walls. "Bring me my doublet, if you would. The grey with the direwolf sigil. I want this armourer to know who I am. It might make him more forthcoming." Jory went to the wardrobe. "Lord Renly is brother to Lord Stannis as well as the king." "Yet it seems that he was not invited on these rides." Ned was not sure what to make of Renly, with all his friendly ways and easy smiles. A few days past, he had taken Ned aside to show him an exquisite rose-gold locklet. Inside was a miniature painted in the vivid Mirish style of a lovely young girl with those eyes and a cascade of soft brown hair. Randy had seemed anxious to know if the girl reminded him of anyone, and when Ned had no answer but a shrug, he had seemed disappointed. The maid was Loras Tyrell's sister Marjorie, he'd confessed, but there were those who said she looked like Lyanna. No, Ned had told him, bemused. Could it be that Lord Renly, who looked so like a young Robert, had conceived a passion for a girl he fancied to be a young Lyanna? That struck him as more than passing queer. Jory held out the doublet, and Ned slid his hand through the armholes. "Perhaps Lord Stannis will return for Robert's tourney," he said as Jory laced the garment up the back. "That would be a stroke of fortune, my lord," Jory said. Ned buckled on a longsword. "In other words, not bloody likely." His smile was grim. Jory draped Ned's cloak across his shoulders and clasped it at the throat with the hand's badge of office. "The armourer lives above his shop in a large house at the top of the Street of Steel. Alan knows the way, my lord." Ned nodded. "The gods help this potboy if he's sent me off herring after shadows." It was a slim enough staff to lean on, but the Jon Arryn that Ned Stark had known was not one to wear jewelled and silvered plate. Steel was steel. It was meant for protection, not ornament. He might have changed his views, to be sure. He would scarcely have been the first man who came to look on things differently after a few years at court, but the change was marked enough to make Ned wonder. "Is there any other service I might perform?" "I suppose you'd best begin visiting whorehouses." "Hard duty, my lord." Jory grinned. "The man will be glad to help. Porter has made a fair start already." Ned's favourite horse was saddled and waiting in the yard. Varley and Jax fell in beside him as he rode through the yard. Their steel caps and shirts of mail must have been sweltering, yet they said no word of complaint. As Lord Eddard passed beneath the King's Gate into the stink of the city, his grey and white cloak streaming from his shoulders, he saw eyes everywhere and kicked his mount into a trot. His guard followed. He looked behind him frequently as they made their way through the crowded city streets. Tormod and Desmond had left the castle early this morning to take up positions on the route they must take and watch for anyone following them, but even so, Ned was uncertain. The shadow of the king's spider and his little birds had him fretting like a maiden on her wedding night. The Street of Steel began at the market square beside the river gate, as it was named on maps, or the mud gate, as it was commonly called. A mummer on stilts was striding through the throngs like some great insect, with a horde of barefoot children trailing behind him, hooting. Elsewhere, 2 rag boys no older than Bran were duelling with sticks, to the loud encouragement of some and the furious curses of others. An old woman ended the contest by leaning out of her window and emptying a bucket of slops on the heads of the combatants. In the shadow of the wall, farmers stood beside their wagons, bellowing out, "Apples, the best apples, cheap at twice the price," and "blood melons, sweet as honey," and "turnips, onion, roots, here you go here you go, turnips, onions, roots, here you go here." The mud gate was open, and a squad of city watchmen stood under the portcullis in their golden cloaks, leaning on spears. When a column of riders appeared from the west, the guardsmen sprang into action, shouting commands and moving the carts and foot traffic aside to let the knight enter with his escort. The first rider through the gate carried a long black banner. The silk rippled in the wind like a living thing. Across the fabric was blazoned a night sky slashed with purple lightning. "Make way for Lord Beric!" the rider shouted. "Make way for Lord Beric!" And close behind came the young lord himself, a dashing figure on a black courser, with red gold hair and a black satin cloak dusted with stars. "Here to fight in the Hand's Tourney, my lord?" a guardsman called out to him. "Here to win the Hand's Tourney," Lord Beric shouted back as the crowd cheered. Ned turned off the square where the Street of Steel began, and followed its winding path up a long hill, past blacksmiths working at open forges, free riders haggling over mail shirts, and grizzled ironmongers selling old blades and razors from their wagons. The farther they climbed, the larger the buildings grew. The man they wanted was all the way at the top of the hill, in a huge house of timber and plaster whose upper stories loomed over the narrow street. The double doors showed a hunting scene carved in ebony and weirwood. A pair of stone knights stood sentry at the entrance, armoured in fanciful suits of polished red steel that transformed them into griffin and unicorn. Ned left his horse with Jax and shouldered his way inside. The slim young serving girl took quick note of Ned's badge and the sigil in his doublet, and the master came hurrying out, all smiles and bows. "Wine for the king's hand," he told the girl, gesturing Ned to a couch. I'm Tobo Mott, my lord. Please, put yourself at ease." He wore a black velvet coat with hammers embroidered on the sleeves in silver thread. Around his neck was a heavy silver chain and a sapphire as large as a pigeon's egg. "If you are in need of new arms for the hand's tourney, you have come to the right shop." Ned did not bother to correct him. "My work is costly, and I make no apologies for that, my lord," he said as he filled 2 matching silver goblets. "You will not find craftsmanship equal to mine anywhere in the 7 kingdoms, I promise you. Visit every forge in King's Landing if you like, and compare for yourself. Any village smith can hammer out a shirt of mail. My work is art." Ned sipped his wine and let the man go on. "The Knight of Flowers bought all his armor here," Tobo boasted, "and many high lords, the ones who knew fine steel, and even Lord Renly, the king's own brother. Perhaps the hand had seen Lord Renly's new armor, the green plate with the golden antlers? No other armor in the city could get that deep a green. He knew the secret of putting color in the steel itself. Paint and enamel were the crutches of a journeyman. Or mayhaps the hand wanted a blade? Tobo had learned to work Valyrian steel at the forges of Qohor as a boy. Only a man who knew the spells could take old weapons and forge them anew. The dire wolf is a sigil of House Stark, is it not? I could fashion a dire wolf helm so real that children will run from you in the streets," he vowed. Ned smiled. "Did you make a falcon helm for Lord Arryn?" Tobo Mott paused a long moment and set aside his wine. "The hand did call upon me with Lord Stannis, the king's brother. I regret to say they did not honor me with their patronage." Ned looked at the man evenly, saying nothing, waiting. He had found over the years that silence sometimes yielded more than questions, and so it was this time. "They asked to see the boy," the armorer said, "so I took them back to the forge." "The boy," Ned echoed. He had no notion who the boy might be. "I should like to see the boy as well." Tobo Mott gave him a cool, careful look. "As you wish, my lord," he said with no trace of his former friendliness. He led Ned out a rear door and across a narrow yard, back to the cavernous stone barn where the work was done. When the armorer opened the door, the blast of hot air that came through made Ned feel as though he were walking into a dragon's mouth. Inside, a forge blazed in each corner, and the air stank of smoke and sulphur. Journeyman armorers glanced up from their hammers and tongs just long enough to wipe the sweat from their brows, while bare-chested apprentice boys worked the bellows. The master called over a tall lad about Rob's age, his arms and chest corded with muscle. "This is Lord Stark, the new hand of the king," he told him as the boy looked at Ned through sullen blue eyes and pushed back sweat-soaked hair with his fingers. Thick hair, shaggy and unkempt and black as ink. The shadow of a new beard darkened his jaw. "This is Gendry, strong for his age, and he works hard. Show the hand that helmet you bade, lad." Almost shyly the boy led him to his bench, and a steel helm shaped like a bull's head, with 2 great curving horns. Ned turned the helm over in his hands. It was raw steel, unpolished but expertly shaped. "This is fine work. I would be pleased if you would let me buy it." The boy snatched it out of his hand. "It's not for sale." Tobo Mott looked horror-struck. "Boy, this is the king's hand. If his lordship wants this helm, make him a gift of it. He honors you by asking." "I made it for me," the boy said stubbornly. "100 pardons, my lord," his master said hurriedly to Ned. "The boy is crude as new steel, and like new steel would profit from some beating. That helm is journeyman's work at best. Forgive him, and I promise I will craft you a helm like none you have ever seen." "He's done nothing that requires my forgiveness. Gendry, when Lord Arryn came to see you, what did you talk about?" "He asked me questions is all, my lord." "What sort of questions?" The boy shrugged. "How was I, and was I well treated, and if I liked the work, and stuff about my mother, who she was and what she looked like and all." "What did you tell him?" Ned asked. The boy shoved the fresh fall of black hair off his forehead. "She died when I was little. She had yellow hair, and sometimes she used to sing to me, I remember. She worked in an alehouse." "Did Lord Stannis question you as well?" "The bald one? No, not him. He never said no word, just glared at me, like I was some raper who'd done for his daughter." "Mind your filthy tongue," the master said. "This is the king's own hand." The boy lowered his eyes. "A smart boy, but stubborn. That helm. The others call him bull-headed, so he threw it in their teeth. Ned touched the boy's head, fingering the thick black hair. Look at me, Gendry. The apprentice lifted his face. Ned studied the shape of his jaw, the eyes like blue ice. Yes, he thought. I see it. Go back to your work, lad. I'm sorry to have bothered you. He walked back to the house with the master. Who paid the boy's apprentice fee? He asked lightly. Mott looked fretful. You saw the boy. Such a strong boy. Those hands of his, those hands were made for hammers. He had such promise, I took him on without a fee. The truth now, Ned urged. The streets are full of strong boys. The day you take on an apprentice without a fee will be the day the wall comes down. Who paid for him? A lord, the master said reluctantly. He gave no name and wore no sigil on his coat. He paid in gold, twice the customary sum, and said he was paying once for the boy and once for my silence. Describe him. He was stout, round of shoulder, not so tall as you. Brown beard, but there was a bit of red in it, I'll swear. He wore a rich cloak, that I do remember, heavy purple velvet worked with silver threads, but the hood shadowed his face and I never did see him clear. He hesitated a moment. My lord, I want no trouble. None of us wants trouble, but I fear these are troubled times, Master Mott, Ned said. You know who the boy is. I'm only an armourer, my lord. I know what I'm told. You know who the boy is, Ned repeated patiently. That is not a question. The boy's my apprentice, the master said. He looked Ned in the eye, stubborn as old iron. Who he was before he came to me, that's none of my concern. Ned nodded. He decided that he liked Tobo Mott, master armourer. If the day ever comes when Gendry would rather wield a sword than forge one, send him to me. He has the look of a warrior. Until then, you have my thanks, Master Mott, and my promise. Should I ever want a helm to frighten children, this will be the first place I visit. His guard was waiting outside with the horses. Did you find anything, my lord? Jax asked as Ned mounted up. I did, Ned told him, wondering. What had Jon Arryn wanted with the king's bastard, and why was it worth his life? Chapter 28. Catelyn. My lady, you ought cover your head, Sir Roderick told her as their horses plodded north. You will take a chill. It is only water, Sir Roderick, Catelyn replied. Her hair hung wet and heavy, a loose strand struck to her forehead, and she could imagine how ragged and wild she must look, but for once she did not care. The southern rain was soft and warm. Catelyn liked the feel of it on her face, gentle as a mother's kisses. It took her back to her childhood, to long grey days at Riverrun. She remembered the godswood, dropping branches heavy with moisture, and the sound of her brother's laughter as he chased her through piles of damp leaves. She remembered making mud pies with Lisa, the weight of them, the mud slick and brown between her fingers. They had served them to Littlefinger, giggling, and he'd eaten so much mud he was sick for a week. How young they all had been. Catelyn had almost forgotten. In the north, the rain fell cold and hard, and sometimes at night it turned to ice. It was as likely to kill a crop as nurture it, and it sent grown men running for the nearest shelter. That was no rain for little girls to play in. I'm soaked through, Sir Roderick complained. Even my bones are wet. The woods pressed close around them, and the steady pattering of rain on leaves was accompanied by the small sucking sound their horses made as their hooves pulled free of the mud. We will want a fire tonight, my lady, and a hot meal would serve us both. There is an inn at the crossroads up ahead, Catelyn told him. She had slept many a night there in her youth, travelling with her father. Lord Hoster Tully had been a restless man in his prime, always riding somewhere. She still remembered the innkeep, a fat woman named Marcia Haddle who'd shoot Sourleaf night and day and seemed to have an endless supply of smiles and sweet cakes for the children. The sweet cakes had been soaked with honey, rich and heavy on the tongue, but how Catelyn had dreaded those smiles. The sour leaf had strained Masha's teeth a dark red and made her smile a bloody horror. An inn, Sir Roderick repeated wistfully. If only... But we dare not risk it. If we wish to remain unknown, I think it's best we seek out some small holdfast. He broke off as they heard sounds up the road, splashing water, the clink of mail, a horse's whinny. "Riders," he warned, his hand dropping to the hilt of his sword. Even on the King's Road it never hurt to be wary. They followed the sounds around a lazy bend of the road and saw them, a column of armored men noisily fording a swollen stream. Caitlin reined up to let them pass. The banner in the hand of the foremost rider hung sodden and limp, but the guardsmen wore indigo cloaks, and on their shoulders flew the silver eagle of Seaguard. "Malisters," Sir Roderick whispered to her, as if she had not known. "My lady, best pull up your hood." Caitlin made no move. Lord Jason Mallister himself rode with them, surrounded by his knights, his son Patrick by his side and their squires close behind. They were riding for King's Landing at the Hand's tourney, she knew. For the past week, the travellers had been thick as flies upon the King's Road. Knights and free riders, singers with their harps and drums, heavy wagons laden with hops or corn or casks of honey, traders and craftsmen and whores, and all of them moving south. She studied Lord Jason boldly. The last time she had seen him he had been jesting with her uncle at her wedding feast. The Mallister stood bannerman to the Tullys, and his gifts had been lavish. His brown hair was salted with white now, his face chiselled gaunt by time, yet the years had not touched his pride. He rode like a man who feared nothing. Caitlin envied him that. She had come to fear so much. As the riders passed, Lord Jason nodded a curt greeting, but it was only a high lord's courtesy to strangers chance met on the road. There was no recognition in those fierce eyes, and his son did not even waste a look. "He did not know you," Sir Roderick said after, wondering. He saw a pair of mud-spattered travellers by the side of the road, wet and tired. It would never occur to him to suspect that one of them was the daughter of his liege lord. "I think we shall be safe enough at the inn, Sir Roderick." It was near dark when they reached it, at the crossroads north of the great confluence of the Trident. Masha Haddle was fatter and greyer than Caitlin remembered, still chewing her sour leaf, but she gave them only the most cursory of looks, with nary a hint of her ghastly red smile. "2 rooms at the top of the stair, that's all there is," she said, chewing all the time. "They're under the bell tower. You won't be missing meals, though there's some thinks it's too noisy. Can't be helped. We're full up, or near as makes no matter. It's those rooms or the road." It was those rooms, low, dusty garrets at the top of a cramped narrow staircase. "Leave your boots down here," Masha told them after she'd taken their coin. "The boy will clean them. I won't have you tracking mud up my stairs. Mind the bell. Those who come late to meals don't eat." There were no smiles and no mention of sweet cakes. When the supper bell rang, the sound was deafening. Caitlin had changed into dry clothes. She sat by the window, watching rain run down the pane. The glass was milky and full of bubbles, and the wet dusk was falling outside. Caitlin could just make out the muddy crossing where the 2 great roads met. The crossroads gave her pause. If they turned west from here, it was an easy ride down to Riverrun. Her father had always given her wise counsel when she needed it most, and she yearned to talk to him, to warn him of the gathering storm. If Winterfell needed to brace for war, how much more so Riverrun, so much closer to King's Landing, with the power of Casterly Rock looming to the west like a shadow. If only her father had been stronger, she might have chanced it, but Hoster Tully had been bedridden these past 2 years, and Caitlin was loath to tax him now. The eastern road was wilder and more dangerous, climbing through rocky foothills and thick forests into the mountains of the moon, past high passes and deep chasms to the Vale of Arryn and the stony fingers beyond. Above the vale, the Eyrie stood high and impregnable, its towers reaching for the sky. There she would find her sister, and, perhaps, some of the answers Ned sought. Surely Lisa knew more than she had dared to put in her letter. She might have the very proof that Ned needed to bring the Lannisters to ruin, and if it came to war, they would need the Arryns and the Eastern lords who owed them service. Yet the mountain road was perilous. Shadow cats prowled those passes, rock slides were common, and the mountain's clans were lawless brigands, descending from the heights to rob and kill and melting away like snow whenever the knights rode out from the vale in search of them. Even Jon Arryn, as great a lord as any the Eyrie had ever known, had always travelled in strength when he crossed the mountains. Caitlin's only strength was one elderly knight, armoured in loyalty. No, she thought. Riverrun and the Eyrie would have to wait. Her path ran north to Winterfell, where her sons and her duty were waiting for her. As soon as they were safely past the neck, she could declare herself to one of Ned's bannermen and send riders racing ahead with orders to mount a watch in the King's Road. The rain obscured the fields beyond the crossroads, but Catelyn saw the land clear enough in her memory. The marketplace was just across the way, and the village a mile farther on, 100 white cottages surrounding a small stone sept. There would be more now. The summer had been long and peaceful. North of here, the King's Road ran along the green fork of the Trident, through fertile valleys and green woodlands, past thriving towns and stout holdfasts and the castles of the river lords. Catelyn knew them all, the Blackwoods and the Brackens, ever enemies, whose quarrels her father was obliged to settle. Lady Went, last of her line, who dwelt with her ghosts in the cavernous vaults of Harrenhal. Irascible Lord Frey, who had outlived 7 wives and filled his twin castles with children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and bastards and grandbastards as well. All of them were bannermen to the Tullys, their swords sworn to the service of Riverrun. Catelyn wondered if that would be enough if it came to war. Her father was the staunchest man who'd ever lived, and she had no doubt that he would call his banners. But would the banners come? The Darrys and Rhaegars and Mootons had sworn oaths to Riverrun as well. Yet they had fought with Rhaegar Targaryen on the Trident, while Lord Frey had arrived with his levies well after the battle was over, leaving some doubt as to which army he had planned to join. Theirs, he had assured the victory solemnly in the aftermath, but ever after her father had called him the late Lord Frey. It must not come to war, Catelyn thought fervently. They must not let it. Sir Roderick came for her just as the bell ceased its clangour. "We had best make haste if we hope to eat tonight, my lady." "It might be safer if we were not a knight and lady until we passed the neck," she told him. "Common travellers attract less notice. A father and daughter taken to the road on some family business, say." "As you say, my lady," Sir Roderick agreed. It was only when she laughed that he realized what he'd done. "The old courtesies die hard, my daughter." He tried to tug on his missing whiskers and sighed with exasperation. Catelyn took his arm. "Come, father," she said. "You'll find that Marcia Hiddle sets a good table, I think, but try not to praise her. You truly don't want to see her smile." The common room was long and draughty, with a row of huge wooden kegs at one end and a fireplace at the other. A serving boy ran back and forth with skewers of meat while Masha drew beer from the kegs, chewing her sour leaf all the while. The benches were crowded, townsfolk and farmers mingling freely with all manners of travellers. The crossroads made for odd companions. Dyers with black and purple hands shared a bench with rivermen reeking of fish. An ironsmith thick with muscles squeezed in beside a wizened old septon. Hard-bitten sellswords and soft plump merchants swapped news like boon companions. The company included more swords than Catelyn would have liked. 3 by the fire wore the red stallion badge of the Brackens, and there was a large party in blue steel ringmail and capes of a silvery grey. On their shoulder was another familiar sigil, the twin towers of House Frey. She studied their faces, but they were all too young to have known her. The senior among them would have been no older than Bran when she went north. Sir Roderick found them an empty place on a bench near the kitchen. Across the table a handsome youth was fingering a wood harp. "7 blessings to you, good folk," he said as they sat. An empty wine cup stood on a table before him. "And to you, singer," Catelyn returned. Sir Roderick called for bread and meat and beer in a tone that meant now. The singer, a youth of some 18 years, eyed them boldly and asked where they were going, and from whence they had come, and what news they had, letting the questions fly as quick as arrows, and never pausing for an answer. "We left King's Landing a fortnight ago," Catelyn replied, answering the safest of his questions. "That's where I'm bound," the youth said. As she had suspected, he was more interested in telling his own story than in hearing theirs. Singers loved nothing half so well as the sound of their own voices. "The hand's tourney means rich lords with fat purses. The last time I came away with more silver than I could carry, or would have if I hadn't lost it all betting on the Kingslayer to win the day." "The gods frown on the gambler," Sir Roderick said sternly. He was of the north and shared the stark views on tournaments. "They frowned on me for certain," the singer said. "Your cruel gods and the Knight of Flowers altogether did me in." "No doubt there was a lesson for you," Sir Roderick said. "It was. This time my coin will champion Sir Loras." Sir Roderick tried to tug at whiskers that were not there, but before he could frame a rebuke the serving boy came scurrying up. He laid tranches of bread before them and filled them with chunks of browned meat of a skewer, dripping with hot juice. Another skewer held tiny onions, fire peppers, and fat mushrooms. Sir Roderick sat too lustily as the lad ran back to fetch them beer. "My name is Marillion," the singer said, plucking a string on his wood harp. "Doubtless you've heard me play somewhere?" His manner made Caitlin smile. Few wandering singers ever ventured as far north as Winterfell, but she knew his like from her girlhood in Riverrun. "I fear not," she told him. He drew a plaintive chord from the wood harp. "That is your loss," he said. "Who was the finest singer you've ever heard?" "Alia of Bravos," Sir Roderick answered at once. "Oh, I'm much better than that old stick," Marillion said. "If you have the silver for a song, I'll gladly show you." "I might have a copper or two, but I'd sooner toss it down a well than pay for your howling," Sir Roderick roused. His opinion of singers was well known. Music was a lovely thing for girls, but he could not comprehend why any healthy boy would fill his hand with a harp when he might have had a sword. "Your grandfather has a sour nature," Marillion said to Caitlin. "I meant to do you honor, an homage to your beauty. In truth, I was made to sing for kings and high lords." "Oh, I can see that," Caitlin said. "Lord Tully is fond of song, I hear. No doubt you've been to Riverrun." "100 times," the singer said airily. "They keep a chamber for me, and the young lord is like a brother." Caitlin smiled, wondering what Admer would think of that. Another singer had once batted a girl her brother fancied. He had hated the breed ever since. "And Winterfell?" she asked him. "Have you travelled north?" "Why would I?" Marillion asked. "It's all blizzards and bearskins up there, and the Starks know no music but the howling of wolves." Distantly, she was aware of the door banging open at the far end of the room. "Innkeep," a servant's voice called out behind her. "We have horses that want stabling, and my Lord of Lannister requires a room and a hot bath." "Oh gods," Sir Roderick said before Caitlin reached out to silence him, her fingers tightening hard around his forearm. Masha Heddle was bowing and smiling her hideous red smile. "I'm sorry, my lord. Truly, we're full up, every room." There were 4 of them, Caitlin saw. An old man in the black of the Night's Watch, 2 servants, and him, standing there small and bold as life. "My man will steep in your stable, and as for myself, well, I do not require a large room, as you can plainly see." He flashed a mocking grin. "So long as the fire's warm and the straw reasonably free of fleas, I am a happy man." Masha Heddle was beside herself. "My lord, there's nothing. It's the tourney. There's no help for it. Oh." Tyrion Lannister pulled a coin from his purse and flicked it up over his head, caught it, tossed it again. Even across the room where Caitlin sat, the wink of gold was unmistakable. A free rider in a faded blue cloak lurched to his feet. "You're welcome to my room, my lord." "Now there's a clever man," Lannister said as he sent the coin spinning across the room. The free rider snatched it from the air. "And a nimble one to boot." The dwarf turned back to Masha Heddle. "You will be able to manage food, I trust?" "Anything you like, my lord. Anything at all," the innkeep promised. And may he choke on it, Caitlin thought, but it was Bran she saw choking, drowning on his own blood. Lannister glanced at the nearest tables. "My men will have whatever you're serving these people. Double portions, we've had a long hard ride. I'll take a roast fowl, chicken, duck, pigeon, it makes no matter, and send up a flagon of your best wine. Yoren, will you sup with me?" "Aye, my lord, I will," the black brother replied. The dwarf had not so much as glanced toward the far end of the room, and Caitlin was thinking how grateful she was for the crowded benches between them when suddenly Marillion bounded to his feet. "My Lord of Lannister!" he called out. "I would be pleased to entertain you while you eat. Let me sing you the lay of your father's great victory at King's Landing." "Nothing would be more likely to ruin my supper," the dwarf said dryly. His mismatched eyes considered the singer briefly, started to move away, and found Caitlin. He looked at her for a moment, puzzled. She turned her face away, but too late. The dwarf was smiling. "Lady Stark, what an unexpected pleasure," he said. "I was sorry to miss you at Winterfell." Marillion gaped at her, confusion giving way to chagrin as Caitlin rose slowly to her feet. She heard Sir Roderick curse. If only the man had lingered at the wall, she thought. If only... Lady Stark? Masha Haddle said thickly. I was still Caitlin Tully the last time I bedded here, she told the innkeep. She could hear the muttering, feel the eyes upon her. Caitlin glanced around the room, at the faces of the knights and sworn swords, and took a deep breath to slow the frantic beating of her heart. Did she dare take the risk? There was no time to think it through, only the moment and the sound of her own voice ringing in her ears. You in the corner, she said to an older man she had not noticed until now. Is that the black badge of Harrenhal I see embroidered on your surcoat, sir? The man got to his feet. It is, my lady. And is Lady Went a true and honest friend to my father, Lord Hoster Tully of Riverrun? She is, the man replied stoutly. Sir Roderick rose quietly and loosened his sword in its scabbard. The dwarf was blinking at them, blank-faced, with puzzlement in his mismatched eyes. The red stallion was ever a welcome sight in Riverrun, she said to the trio by the fire. My father counts Jonas Bracken amongst his oldest and most loyal bannermen. The 3 men-at-arms exchanged uncertain looks. Our lord is honoured by his trust, one of them said hesitantly. I envy your father all these fine friends, Lannister quipped, but I do not quite see the purpose of this, Lady Stark. She ignored him, turning to the large party in blue and grey. They were the heart of the matter. There were more than 20 of them. I know your sigil as well, the Twin Towers of Frey. How fares your good lord, sirs? Their captain rose. Lord Walder is well, my lady. He plans to take a new wife on his 90th name day, and has asked your lord father to honour the wedding with his presence. Tyrion Lannister sniggered. That was when Caitlin knew he was hers. This man came a guest into my house, and there conspired to murder my son, a boy of 7, she proclaimed to the room at large, pointing. Sir Roderick moved to her side, his sword in hand. In the name of King Robert and the good lords you serve, I call upon you to seize him and help me return him to Winterfell, to await the king's justice. She did not know what was more satisfying, the sound of a dozen swords drawn as one, or the look on Tyrion Lannister's face. Chapter 29. Sansa. Sansa rode to the Hans Tone with Septim Mordane and Janie Poole, in a litter with curtains of yellow silk so fine she could see right through them. They turned the whole world gold. Beyond the city walls, 100 pavilions had been raised beside the river, and the common folk came out in the thousands to watch the games. The splendor of it all took Sansa's breath away. The shining armor, the great chargers caparisoned in silver and gold, the shouts of the crowd, the banners snapping in the wind, and the knights themselves, the knights most of all. It is better than the songs, she whispered when they found the places that her father had promised her among the high lords and ladies. Sansa was dressed beautifully that day, in a green gown that brought out the auburn of her hair, and she knew they were looking at her and smiling. They watched the heroes of 100 songs ride forth, each more fabulous than the last. The 7 knights of the King's Guard took the field, all but Jaime Lannister in the scaled armor the colour of milk, their cloaks as white as fresh-fallen snow. Sir Jaime wore the white cloak as well, but beneath it he was shining gold from head to foot, with a lion's head helm and a golden sword. Sir Gregor Clegane, the mountain that rides, thundered past him like an avalanche. Sansa remembered Lord Yohn Royce, who had guested at Winterfell 2 years before. His armor is bronze, thousands and thousands of years old, engraved with magic runes that ward him against harm, she whispered to Janie. Septim Mordane pointed out Lord Jason Mallister, in indigo chased with silver, the wings of an eagle on his helm. He had cut down 3 of Rhaegar's bannermen on the trident. The girls giggled over the warrior priest Taurus of Myr, with his flapping red robes and shaven head, until the scepter told them that he had once scaled the walls of Peak with a flaming sword in hand. Other riders Sansa did not know, hedge knights from the Fingers and Highgarden and the Mountains of Dorne, unsung free riders and new-made squires, the younger sons of high lords and the heirs of lesser houses. Younger men, most had done no great deeds as yet, but Sansa and Janie agreed that one day the 7 kingdoms would resound to the sound of their names. Sir Balin Swan, Lord Bryce Caron of the Marches, Bronze John's heir, Sir Andar Royce, and his younger brother Sir Robber, their silvered steel plate filigreed in bronze with the same ancient runes that warded their father. The twins Sir Horace and Sir Hobber, whose shields displayed the grape cluster sigil of the red wines, Burgundian blue. Patrick Mallister, Lord Jason's son, 6 Freys of the Crossing, Sir Gerard, Sir Hostine, Sir Denwell, Sir Ammon, Sir Theo, Sir Perwyn, sons and grandsons of old Lord Walder Frey, and his bastard son Martin Rivers as well. Janie Poole confessed herself frightened by the look of Jalabak Saw, an exiled prince from the Summer Isles who wore a cape of green and scarlet feathers of a skin as dark as night. But when she saw young Lord Beric Dondarrion, with his hair like red gold and his black shield slashed by lightning, she pronounced herself willing to marry him on the instant. The Hound entered the lists as well, and so too the king's brother, handsome Lord Renly of Storm's End. Jory, Allen, and Harwin rode for Winterfell and the north. "Jory looks a beggar among these others," Septim Mordane sniffed when he appeared. Sansa could only agree. Jory's armor was blue-grey plate without device or ornament, and a thin grey cloak hung from his shoulders like a soiled rag. Yet he acquitted himself well, unhorsing Horace Redwyne in his first joust and one of the Freys in his second. In his third march, he rode 3 passes at a free rider named Lothrop Brune, whose armor was as drab as his own. Neither man lost his seat, but Brune's lance was steadier and his blows better placed, and the king gave him the victory. Allen and Harwin fared less well. Harwin was unhorsed in his first tilt by Sir Meryn of the Kingsguard, while Allen fell to Sir Balon Swan. The jousting went all day and into the dusk, the hoofs of the great war horses pounding down the lists until the field was a ragged wasteland of torn earth. A dozen times Janie and Sansa cried out in unison as riders crashed together, lances exploding into splinters while the commons screamed for their favorites. Janie covered her eyes whenever a man fell, like a frightened little girl, but Sansa was made of sterner stuff. A great lady knew how to behave at tournaments. Even Septim Mordane noted her composure and nodded in approval. The Kingslayer rode brilliantly. He overthrew Sir Andar Royce and the marcher Lord Bryce Caron as easily as if he were riding at rings, and then took a hard-fought match from white-haired Barristan Selmy, who had won his first 2 tilts against men 30 and 40 years his junior. Sandor Clegane and his immense brother, Sir Gregor the Mountain, seemed unstoppable as well, riding down one foe after the next in ferocious style. The most terrifying moment of the day came during Sir Gregor's second joust, when his lance rode up and struck a young knight from the Vale under that gorget with such force that it drove through his throat, killing him instantly. The youth fell not 10 feet from where Sansa was seated. The point of Sir Gregor's lance had snapped off in his neck, and his life's blood flowed out in slow pulses, each weaker than the one before. His armor was shiny new. A bright streak of fire ran down his outstretched arm as the steel caught the light. Then the sun went behind a cloud, and it was gone. His cloak was blue, the color of the sky on a clear summer day, trimmed with a border of crescent moons, but as his blood seeped into it, the cloth darkened and the moons turned red, one by one. Janie Poole wept so hysterically that Septim Mordane finally took her off to regain her composure, but Sansa sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching with a strange fascination. She had never seen a man die before. She ought to be crying too, she thought, but the tears would not come. Perhaps she had used up all her tears for Lady and Bran. It would be different if it had been Jory or Sir Roderick or father, she told herself. The young knight in the blue cloak was nothing to her, some stranger from the Vale of Arryn whose name she had forgotten as soon as she heard it. And now the world would forget his name too, Sansa realized. There would be no songs sung for him. That was sad. After they carried off the body, a boy with a spade ran onto the field and shoveled dirt over the spot where he had fallen, to cover up the blood. Then the joust resumed. Sir Balon Swan also fell to Gregor, and Lord Renly to the Hound. Renly was unhorsed so violently that he seemed to fly backward off his charger, legs in the air. His head hit the ground with an audible crack that made the crowd gasp, but it was just the golden antler on his helm. One of the tines had snapped off beneath him. When Lord Renly climbed to his feet, the commons cheered wildly, for King Robert's handsome young brother was a great favourite. He handed the broken tine to his conqueror with a gracious bow. The hound snorted and tossed a broken antler into the crowd, where the commons began to punch and claw over the little bit of gold, until Lord Renly walked out among them and restored the peace. By then, Septa Mordane had returned, alone. Janey had been feeling ill, she explained. She had helped her back to the castle. Sansa had almost forgotten about Janey. Later, a hedge knight in a checkered cloak disgraced himself by killing Beric Dondarrion's horse and was declared forfeit. Lord Beric shifted his saddle to a new mount, only to be knocked right off it by Thoros of Myr. Sir Aron Santaga and Lothar Brune tilted thrice without result. Sir Aron fell afterward to Lord Jason Mallister, and Brune to John Roy's younger son, Robber. In the end it came down to 4. The Hound and his monstrous brother Gregor, Jaime Lannister the Kingslayer, and Sir Loras Tyrell, the youth they called the Knight of Flowers. Sir Loras was the youngest son of Mace Tyrell, the Lord of Highgarden and Warden of the South. At 16 he was the youngest rider on the field, yet he had unhorsed 3 knights of the Kingsguard that morning in his first 3 jousts. Sansa had never seen anyone so beautiful. His place was intricately fashioned and enamelled as a bouquet of 1,000 different flowers, and his snow-white stallion was draped in a blanket of red and white roses. After each victory, Sir Loras would remove his helm and ride slowly round the fence, and finally pluck a single white rose from the blanket and toss it to some fair maiden in the crowd. His last match of the day was against the younger Royce. Sir Robber's ancestor runes proved small protection as Sir Loras split his shield and drove him from saddle to crash with an awful clangor in the dirt. Robber lay moaning as the victor made his circuit of the field. Finally, they called for a litter and carried him off to his tent, dazed and unmoving. Sansa never saw it. Her eyes were only for Sir Loras. When the white horse stopped in front of her, she thought her heart would burst. The other maidens he had given white roses, but the one he plucked for her was red. "Sweet lady," he said, "no victory is half so beautiful as you." Sansa took the flower timidly, struck dumb by his gallantry. His hair was a mass of lazy brown curls, his eyes like liquid gold. She inhaled the sweet fragrance of the rose, and sat clutching it long after Sir Loras had ridden off. When Sansa finally looked up, a man was standing over her, staring. He was short, with a pointed beard and a silver streak in his hair, almost as old as her father. "You must be one of her daughters," he said to her. He had grey-green eyes that did not smile when his mouth did. "You have the Tully look." "I'm Sansa Stark," she said, ill at ease. The man wore a heavy cloak with a fur collar, fastened with a silver mockingbird, and he had the effortless manner of a high lord, but she did not know him. "I have not had the honour, my lord." Septa Mordane quickly took a hand. "Sweet child, this is Lord Petyr Baelish of the King's Small Council." "Your mother was my Queen of Beauty once," the man said quietly. His breath smelled of mint. "You have her hair." His fingers brushed against her cheek as he stroked one auburn lock. Quite abruptly he turned and walked away. By then, the moon was well up and the crowd was tired, so the king decreed that the last 3 matches would be fought the next morning, before the melee. While the commons began their walk home, talking of the day's jousts and the matches to come on the morrow, the court moved to the riverside to begin the feast. 6 monstrous-hued aurochs had been roasting for hours, turning slowly on wooden spits while kitchen boys basted them with butter and herbs, until the meat crackled and spit. Tables and benches had been raised outside the pavilions, piled high with sweetgrass and strawberries and fresh-baked bread. Sansa and Septa Mordane were given places of high honour, to the left of the raised dais where the king himself sat beside his queen. When Prince Joffrey seated himself to her right, she felt her throat tighten. He had not spoken a word to her since the awful thing had happened, and she had not dared to speak to him. At first she thought she hated him for what they had done to Lady, but after Sansa had wept her eyes dry, she told herself that it had not been Joffrey's doing, not truly. The Queen had done it. She was the one to hate, her and Arya. Nothing bad would have happened except for Arya. She could not hate Joffrey tonight. He was too beautiful to hate. He wore a deep blue doublet studded with a double row of golden lions' heads, and around his brow a slim coronet made of gold and sapphires. His hair was as bright as the metal. Sansa looked at him and trembled, afraid that he might ignore her or, worse, turn hateful again and send her weeping from the table. Instead, Joffrey smiled and kissed her hand, handsome and gallant as any prince in the songs, and said, "Sir Loras has keen eye for beauty, sweet lady." "He was too kind," she demurred, trying to remain modest and calm, though her heart was singing. "Sir Loras is a true knight. Do you think he will win tomorrow, my lord?" "No," Joffrey said. "My dog will do for him, or perhaps my Uncle Jaime, and in a few years, when I am old enough to enter the lists, I shall do for them all." He raised his hand to summon a servant with a flagon of iced summer wine, and poured her a cup. She looked anxiously at Septim Ordain until Joffrey leaned over and filled the Septis cup as well, so she nodded and thanked him graciously, and said not another word. The servants kept the cups filled all night, yet afterwards Sansa could not recall ever tasting the wine. She needed no wine. She was drunk on the magic of the night, giddy with glamour, swept away by beauties she had dreamt of all her life and never dared hope to know. Singers sat before the king's pavilion, filling the dusk with music. A juggler kept a cascade of burning clubs spinning through the air. The king's own fool, the pie-faced simpleton called Moonboy, danced about on stilts, all in motley, making mock of everyone with such daft cruelty that Sansa wondered if he was simple after all. Even Septim Ordain was helpless before him. When he sang his little song about the High Septon, she laughed so hard she spilled wine on herself. And Joffrey was the soul of courtesy. He talked to Sansa all night, showering her with compliments, making her laugh, sharing little bits of court gossip, explaining Moonboy's japes. Sansa was so captivated that she quite forgot all her courtesies and ignored Septim Ordain, seated to her left. All the while the courses came and went, a thick soup of barley and venison, salads of sweetgrass and spinach and plums, sprinkled with crushed nuts, snails and honey and garlic. Sansa had never eaten snails before. Joffrey showed her how to get the snail out of the shell, and fed her the first sweet morsel himself. Then came trout fresh from the river, baked in clay. Her prince helped her crack open the hard casing to expose the flaky white flesh within. And when the meat course was brought out, he served her himself, slicing a queen's portion from the joint, smiling as he laid it on her plate. She could see from the way he moved that his right arm was still troubling him, yet he uttered not a word of complaint. Later came sweetbreads and pigeon pie and baked apples fragrant with cinnamon and lemon cakes frosted in sugar, but by then Sansa was so stuffed that she could not manage more than 2 little lemon cakes, as much as she'd loved them. She was wondering whether she might attempt a third when the king began to shout. King Robert had grown louder with each course. From time to time Sansa could hear him laughing or roaring a command over the music, at the clangor of plates and cutlery, but they were too far away for her to make out his words. Now everybody heard him. "No!" he thundered in a voice that drowned out all other speech. Sansa was shocked to see the king on his feet, red of face, reeling. He had a goblet of wine in one hand, and he was drunk as a man could be. "You do not tell me what to do, woman!" he screamed at Queen Cersei. "I am king here, do you understand? I rule here, and if I say that I will fight tomorrow, I will fight!" Everyone was staring. Sansa saw Sir Barristan, and the king's brother Renly, and the short man who had talked to her so oddly and touched her hair, but no one made a move to interfere. The queen's face was a mask so bloodless that it might have been sculpted from snow. She rose from the table, gathered her skirts around her, and stormed off in silence, servants trailing behind. Jaime Lannister put a hand on the king's shoulder, but the king shoved him away hard. Lannister stumbled and fell. The king guffawed. "The great knight! I can still knock you in the dirt. Remember that, Kingslayer." He slapped his chest with the jeweled goblet, splashing wine all over his satin tunic. "Give me my hammer, and not a man in the realm can stand before me." Jaime Lannister rose and brushed himself off. "As you say, your grace." His voice was stiff. Lord Renly came forward, smiling. "You've spilled your wine, Robert. Let me bring you a fresh goblet." Sansa started as Joffrey laid his hand on her arm. "It grows late," the prince said. He had a queer look on his face, as if he were not seeing her at all. "Do you need an escort back to the castle?" "No," Sansa began. She looked for Septim Ordain and was startled to find her with her head on the table, snoring soft and ladylike snores. "I mean to say, yes, thank you, that would be most kind. I'm tired, and the way is so dark. I should be glad for some protection." Joffrey called out, "Dog!" Sander Clegane seemed to take form out of the night, so quickly did he appear. He had exchanged his armor for a red woolen tunic with a leather dog's head sewn on the front. The light of the torches made his burnt face shine a dull red. "Yes, your grace," he said. "Take my betrothed back to the castle and see that no harm befalls her," the prince told him briskly, and without even a word of farewell, Joffrey strode off, leaving her there. Sansa could feel the hound watching her. "Did you think Joff was going to take you himself?" He laughed. He had a laugh like the snarling of dogs in a pit. "Small chance of that." He pulled her unresisting to her feet. "Come, you're not the only one who needs sleep. I've drunk too much and I may need to kill my brother tomorrow." He laughed again. Suddenly terrified, Sansa pushed at Seth de Mordain's shoulder, hoping to wake her, but she only snored the louder. King Robert had stumbled off and half the benches were suddenly empty. The feast was over, and the beautiful dream had ended with it. The hound snatched up a torch to light their way. Sansa followed close beside him. The ground was rocky and uneven. The flickering light made it seem to shift and move beneath her. She kept her eyes lowered, watching where she placed her feet. They walked among the pavilions, each with its banner and its armor hung outside, the silence weighing heavier with every step. Sansa could not bear the sight of him, he frightened her so, yet she had been raised in all the ways of courtesy. A true lady would not notice his face, she told herself. "You rode gallantly today, Sir Sander," she made herself say. Sander Clegane snarled at her. "Spare me your empty little compliments, girl. And your sirs. I'm no knight. I spit on them and their vows. My brother is a knight. Did you see him ride today?" "Yes," Sansa whispered, trembling. "He was—" "Gallant?" the hound finished. He was mocking her, she realized. No one could withstand him. She managed at last, proud of herself. It was no lie. Sander Clegane stopped suddenly in the middle of a dark and empty field. She had no choice but to stop beside him. "Some Scepter trained you well. You're like one of those birds from the Summer Isles, aren't you? A pretty little talking bird, repeating all the pretty little words they taught you to recite." "That's unkind." Sansa could feel her heart fluttering in her chest. "You're frightening me. I want to go now." "No one could withstand him," the hound rasped. "That's truth enough. No one could ever withstand Gregor. That boy today, his second joust. That was a pretty bit of business. You saw that, did you? Fool boy. He had no business riding in this company. No money, no squire, no one to help him with that armor. That gorget wasn't fastened proper. You think Gregor didn't notice that? You think Sir Gregor's lance rode up by chance, do you? Pretty little talking girl, you believe that. You're empty-headed as a bird for true. Gregor's lance goes where Gregor wants it to go. Look at me. Look at me!" Sander Clegane put a huge hand under her chin and forced her face up. He squatted in front of her and moved the torch close. "There's a pretty for you. Take a good long stare, you know you want to. I've watched you turning away all the way down the King's Road. Piss on that. Take your look." His fingers held her jaw as hard as an iron trap. His eyes watched hers, drunken eyes, sullen with anger. She had to look. The right side of his face was gaunt, with sharp cheekbones and a grey eye beneath a heavy brow. His nose was large and hooked, his hair thin, dark. He wore it long and brushed it sideways, because no hair grew on the other side of that face. The left side of his face was a ruin. His ear had been burned away. There was nothing left but a hole. His eye was still good, but all around it was a twisted mass of scar, slick black flesh hard as leather, pocked with craters and fissured by deep cracks that gleamed red and wet when he moved. Down by his jaw, you could see a hint of bone where the flesh had been seared away. Sansa began to cry. He let go of her then, and snuffed out a torch in the dirt. "No pretty words for that, girl. No little compliments the Scepter taught you." When there was no answer, he continued. "Most of them, they think it was some battle, a siege, a burning tower, an enemy with a torch. One fool asked if it was dragon's breath." His laugh was softer this time, but just as bitter. "I'll tell you what it was, girl," he said, a voice from the night, a shadow leaning so close now that she could smell the sour stench of wine on his breath. I was younger than you, 6, maybe 7. A wood carver set up shop in the village under my father's keep, and to buy favour he sent us gifts. The old man made marvellous toys. I don't remember what I got, but it was Gregor's gift I wanted. A wooden knight, all painted up, every joint pegged separate and fixed with strings, so you could make him fight. Gregor is 5 years older than me. The toy was nothing to him. He was already a squire, near 6 foot tall and muscled like an ox. So I took his knight. But there was no joy to it, I tell you. I was scared all the while, and true enough, he found me. There was a brazier in the room. Gregor never said a word, just picked me up on his arm and shoved the side of my face down in the burning coals, and held me there while I screamed and screamed. You saw how strong he is. Even then, it took 3 grown men to drag him off me. The Septons preach about the 7 hells. What do they know? Only a man who's been burned knows what the hell is truly like. My father told everyone my bedding had caught fire, and our master gave me ointments. Ointments? Gregor got his ointments too. 4 years later, they anointed him with the 7 oils, and he recited his knightly vows, and Rhaegar Targaryen tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Arise, Sir Gregor." The rasping voice trailed off. He squatted silently before her, a hulking black shape shrouded in the night, hidden from her eyes. Sansa could hear his ragged breathing. She was sad for him, she realized. Somehow, the fear had gone away. The silence went on and on, so long that she began to grow afraid once more, but she was afraid for him now, not for herself. She found his massive shoulder with her hand. "He was no true knight," she whispered to him. The hound threw back his head and roared. Sansa stumbled back, away from him, but he caught her arm. "No!" he growled at her. "No, little bird, he was no true knight." The rest of the way into the city, Sandor Clegane said not a word. He led her to where the carts were waiting, told the driver to take them back to the Red Keep, and climbed in after her. They rode in silence through the King's Gate and up torch-lit city streets. He opened the postern door and led her into the castle, his burnt face twitching and his eyes brooding, and he was one step behind her as they climbed the tower stairs. He took her safe all the way to the corridor outside her bedchamber. "Thank you, my lord," Sansa said meekly. The hound caught her by the arm and leaned close. "The things I told you tonight," he said, his voice sounding even rougher than usual. "If you ever tell Joffrey, your sister, your father, any of them—" "I won't," Sansa whispered. "I promise." It was not enough. "If you ever tell anyone," he finished, "I'll kill you." Chapter 30. Eddard. "I stood last vigil for him myself," Sir Barristan Selmy said as they looked down at the body in the back of the cart. "He had no one else. A mother in the Vale, I'm told." In the pale dawn light, the young knight looked as though he were sleeping. He had not been handsome, but death had smoothed his rough-hewn features, and the silent sisters had dressed him in the best velvet tunic, with a high collar to cover the ruin the lance had made of his throat. Eddard Stark looked at his face, and wondered if it had been for his sake that the boy had died. Slain by a Lannister bannerman before Ned could speak to him, could that be mere happenstance? He supposed he would never know. "Hugh was Jon Arryn's squire for 4 years," Selmy went on. "The king knighted him before he rode north, in Jon's memory. The lad wanted it desperately, yet I fear he was not ready." Ned had slept badly last night, and he felt tired beyond his years. "None of us is ever ready," he said. "For knighthood? For death." Gently, Ned covered the boy with his cloak, a blood-stained bit of blue bordered in crescent moons. When his mother asked why her son was dead, he reflected bitterly. They would tell her he had fought to honor the king's hand, Eddard Stark. This was needless. War should not be a game. Ned turned to the woman beside the cart, shrouded in grey, face hidden but for her eyes. The silent sisters prepared men for the grave, and it was ill fortune to look on the face of death. "Send his armor home to the Vale. The mother will want to have it." "It is worth a fair piece of silver," Sir Barristan said. "The boy had it forged special for the tourney. Plain work, but good. I do not know if he had finished paying the smith." "He paid yesterday, my lord, and he paid dearly. Ned replied, and to the silent sister he said, "Send the mother the armor. I will deal with his smith." She bowed her head. Afterwards, Sir Barristan walked with Ned to the king's pavilion. The camp was beginning to stir. Fat sausages sizzled and spit over fire pits, spicing the air with the scents of garlic and pepper. Young squires hurried about on errands as their masters woke, yawning and stretching, to meet the day. A serving man with a goose under his arm bent his knee when he caught sight of them. "My lords," he muttered, as the goose honked and pecked at his fingers. The shields displayed outside each tent heralded its occupant. The Silver Eagle of Seaguard, Bryce Caron's Field of Nightingales, a cluster of grapes for the red wines, brindled boar, red ox, burning tree, white ram, triple spiral, purple unicorn, dancing maiden, black adder, twin towers, horned owl, and last, the pure white blazons of the King's Guard, shining like the dawn. "The king means to fight in a melee today," Sir Barristan said as they were passing Sir Meryn's shield, its paint sullied by a deep gash where Loras Tyrell's lance had scarred the wood as he drove him from his saddle. "Yes," Ned said grimly. Jory had woken him last night to bring him that news. Small wonder he had slept so badly. Sir Barristan's look was troubled. "They say night's beauties fade at dawn, and the children of wine are oft disowned in the morning light." "They say so," Ned agreed. "But not of Robert." Other men might reconsider words spoken in drunken bravado, but Robert Baratheon would remember and, remembering, would never back down. The king's pavilion was close by the water, and the morning mists off the river had wreathed it in wisps of grey. It was all of golden silk, the largest and grandest structure in the camp. Outside the entrance, Robert's warhammer was displayed beside an immense iron shield blazoned with the crowned stag of House Baratheon. Ned had hoped to discover the king still abed in a wine-soaked sleep, but luck was not with him. They found Robert drinking beer from a polished horn and roaring his displeasure at two young squires who were trying to buckle him into his armor. "Your Grace," one was saying, almost in tears, "it's made too small, it won't go." He fumbled, and the gorget was trying to fit around Robert's thick neck tumbled to the ground. "Seven hells!" Robert swore. "Do I have to do it myself? Piss on the both of you. Pick it up. Don't just stand there gaping, Lancel, pick it up." The lad jumped, and the king noticed his company. "Look at these oafs, Ned. My wife insisted I take these two to squire for me, and they're worse than useless. Can't even put a man's armor on him properly. Squires, they say. I say they're swineherds dressed up in silk." Ned only needed a glance to understand the difficulty. "The boys are not at fault," he told the king. "You're too fat for your armor, Robert." Robert Baratheon took a long swallow of beer, tossed the empty horn onto his sleeping furs, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and said darkly, "Fat? Fat, is it? Is that how you speak to your king?" He let go his laughter, sudden as a storm. "Ah, damn you, Ned, why are you always right?" The squire smiled nervously until the king turned on them. "You, yes, both of you. You heard the hand. The king is too fat for his armor. Go find Sir Aaron Suntigar. Tell him I need the breastplate stretcher. Now! What are you waiting for?" The boys tripped over each other in their haste to be quit of the tent. Robert managed to keep a stern face until they were gone. Then he dropped back into a chair, shaking with laughter. Sir Barristan Selmy chuckled with him. Even Eddard Stark managed a smile. Always, though, the graver thoughts crept in. He could not help taking note of the two squires, handsome boys, fair and well-made. One was Sansa's age, with long golden curls, the other perhaps 15, sandy-haired, with a wisp of a moustache and the emerald-green eyes of the queen. "Ah, I wish I could be there to see Santigar's face," Robert said. "I hope he'll have the wit to send them to someone else. We ought to keep them running all day." "Those boys," Ned asked him. "Lannisters?" Robert nodded, wiping tears from his eyes. "Cousins, sons of Lord Tywin's brother, one of the dead ones. Or perhaps the live one, now that I come to think on it. I don't recall. My wife comes from a very large family, Ned." A very ambitious family, Ned thought. He had nothing against the squires, but it troubled him to see Robert surrounded by the queen's kin, waking and sleeping. The Lannister appetite for offices and honours seemed to know no bounds.
The talk is you and the Queen had angry words last night.
The mirth curdled on Robert's face.
The woman tried to forbid me to fight in the melee. She's sulking in the castle now, damn her. Your sister would never have shamed me like that. You never knew Lyanna as I did, Robert,
Ned told him.
You saw her beauty, but not the iron underneath. She would have told you that you have no business in the melee. You too?
The king frowned.
You are a sour man, Stark. Too long in the north, all the juices have frozen inside you. Well, mine are still running.
He slapped his chest to prove it.
You're the king,
Ned reminded him.
I sit on a damn iron seat when I must. Does that mean I don't have the same hungers as other men? A bit of wine now and again, a girl squealing in bed, the feel of a horse between my legs? 7 hells, Ned, I want to hit someone.
Sir Barristan Selmy spoke up. Your Grace, he said, it is not seemly that a king should ride into the melee. It would not be a fair contest. Who would dare strike you? Robert seemed honestly taken aback.
Why, all of them, damn it, if they can, and the last man left standing will be you,
Ned finished. He saw at once that Selmy had hit the mark. The dangers of the melee were only a savour to Robert, but this touched on his pride.
Sir Barristan is right. There is not a man in the 7 kingdoms who would dare risk your displeasure by hurting you.
The king rose to his feet, his face flushed.
Are you telling me those prancing cravens will let me win? For a certainty,
Ned said, and Sir Barristan Selmy bowed his head in silent accord. For a moment Robert was so angry he could not speak. He strode across the tent, whirled, strode back, his face dark and angry. He snatched up his breastplate from the ground and threw it at the Barristan Selmy in a wordless fury. Selmy dodged.
Get out,
the king said then, coldly.
Get out before I kill you.
Sir Barristan left quickly. Ned was about to follow when the king called out again.
Not you, Ned.
Ned turned back. Robert took up his horn again, filled it with beer from a barrel in the corner, and thrust it at Ned.
Drink,
he said briskly.
I've no thirst. Drink! Your king commands it.
Ned took the horn and drank. The beer was black and thick, so strong it stung in the eyes. Robert sat down again.
Damn you, Ned Stark, you and Jon Arryn. I loved you both. What have you done to me? You were the one who should have been king, you or Jon. You had the better claim, your grace. I told you to drink, not to argue. You made me king. You could at least have the courtesy to listen when I talk, damn you. Look at me, Ned. Look at what kinging has done to me. Gods, too fat for my armor. How did it ever come to this? Robert, drink and stay quiet. The king is talking. I swear to you, I was never so alive as when I was winning this throne, or so dead as now that I've won it. And Cersei, I have Jon Arryn to thank for her. I had no wish to marry after Lyanna was taken from me, but Jon said the realm needed an heir. Cersei Lannister would be a good match, he told me. She would bind Lord Tywin to me should Viserys Targaryen ever try to win back his father's throne. The king shook his head. I loved that old man, I swear it, but now I think he was a bigger fool than Moonboy. Oh, Cersei is lovely to look at, truly, but cold. The way she guards her cunt, you'd think she had all the gold of Casterly Rock between her legs. Here, give me that beer if you won't drink it. He took the horn, opened it, belched, wiped his mouth. I'm sorry for your girl, Ned, truly. About the wolf, I mean. My son was lying, I'd stake my soul on it. My son. You love your children, don't you? With all my heart, Ned said. Let me tell you a secret, Ned. More than once I've dreamed of giving up the crown, take ship for the free cities with my horse and my hammer, spend my time warring and whoring, that's what I was made for. The sellsword king, how the singers would love me. You know what stops me? The thought of Joffrey on the throne, with Cersei standing behind him whispering in his ear. My son. How could I have made a son like that, Ned? He's only a boy, Ned said awkwardly. He had small liking for Prince Joffrey, but he could hear the pain in Robert's voice. Have you forgotten how wild you were at his age? It would not trouble me if the boy was wild, Ned. You don't know him as I do."
He sighed and shook his head.
"Perhaps you are right. John despaired of me often enough, yet I grew into a good king."
Robert looked at Ned and scowled at his silence.
"You might speak up and agree now, you know."
"Your Grace," Ned began, carefully. Robert slapped Ned on the back.
"Say that I'm a better king than Aerys and be done with it. You never could lie for love nor honor, Ned Stark. I'm still young, and now that you're here with me, things will be different. We'll make this a reign to sing of, and damn the Lannisters to 7 hells. I smell bacon. Who do you think our champion will be today? Have you seen Mace Tyrell's boy? The Knight of Flowers, they call him. Now there's a son any man would be proud to own to. Last tourney, he dumped the Kingslayer on his golden rump. You ought to have seen the look on Cersei's face. I laughed till my sides hurt. Randy says he has this sister, a maid of 14, lovely as a dawn."
They broke their fast on black bread and boiled goose eggs and fish fried up with onions and bacon at a trestle table by the river's edge. The king's melancholy melted away with the morning mist, and before long Robert was eating an orange and waxing fond about the morning at the Eyrie when they had been boys.
"Had given John a barrel of oranges, remember? Only the things had gone rotten, so I flung mine across the table and hit Dax right in the nose. You remember Redford's pock-faced squire? He tossed one back at me, and before John could so much as fart, there were oranges flying across the high hall in every direction."
He laughed uproariously, and even Ned smiled, remembering. This was the boy he had grown up with, he thought. This was the Robert Baratheon he'd known and loved. If he could prove that the Lannisters were behind the attack on Bran, prove that they had murdered Jon Arryn, this man would listen. Then Cersei would fall, and the Kingslayer with her, and if Lord Tywin dared to rouse the West, Robert would smash him as he had smashed Rhaegar Targaryen on a trident. He could see it all so clearly. That breakfast tasted better than anything Eddard Stark had eaten in a long time, and afterward his smiles came easy and more often, until it was time for the tournament to resume. Ned walked with the king to the jousting field. He had promised to watch the final tilts with Sansa. Septon Mordane was ill today, and his daughter was determined not to miss the end of the jousting. As he saw Robert to his place, he noted that Cersei Lannister had chosen not to appear. The place beside the king was empty. That too gave Ned cause to hope. He shouldered his way to where his daughter was seated, and found her as the horns blew for the day's first joust. Sansa was so engrossed she scarcely seemed to notice his arrival. Sandor Clegane was the first rider to appear. He wore an olive-green cloak over his soot-grey armor. That, and his hound's head helm, were his only concession to ornament.
100 golden dragons on the Kingslayer,
Littlefinger announced loudly as Jaime Lannister entered the lists, riding an elegant blood-bay destrier. The horse wore a blanket of gilded ringmail, and Jaime glittered from head to heel. Even his lance was fashioned from the golden wood of the Summer Isles.
"Done!"
Lord Randy shouted back.
"The hound has a hungry look about him this morning."
"Even hungry dogs know better than to bite the hand that feeds them," Littlefinger called dryly. Sandor Clegane dropped his visor with an audible clang and took up his position. Sir Jaime tossed a kiss to some woman in the Commons, gently lowered his visor, and rode to the end of the lists. Both men couched their lances. Ned Stark would have loved nothing so well as to see them both lose, but Sansa was watching it all moist-eyed and eager. The hastily erected gallery trembled as the horses broke into a gallop. The hound leaned forward as he rode, his lance rock steady, but Jaime shifted his seat deftly in the instant before impact. Clegane's point was turned harmlessly against the golden shield with the lion blazon, while his own hit square. Wood shattered, and the hound reeled, fighting to keep his seat. Sansa gasped. A ragged cheer went up from the Commons.
"I wonder how I ought to spend your money," Littlefinger called down to Lord Renly.
The hound just managed to stay in his saddle. He jerked his mount around hard and rode back to the lists for the second pass. Jaime Lannister tossed down his broken lance and snatched up a fresh one, jesting with his squire. The hound spurred forward at a hard gallop. Lannister rode to meet him. This time, when Jaime shifted his seat, Sandor Clegane shifted with him. Both lances exploded, and by the time the splinters had settled, a riderless blood bay was trotting off in search of grass while Sir Jaime Lannister rolled in the dirt, golden and dented. Sansa said, "I knew the Hound would win." Littlefinger overheard. "If you know who's going to win the second match, speak up now before Lord Renly plucks me clean," he called to her. Ned smiled. "A pity the imp is not here with us," Lord Renly said. "I should have won twice as much." Jaime Lannister was back on his feet, but his ornate lion helmet had been twisted around and dented in his fall, and now he could not get it off. The commons were hooting and pointing, the lords and ladies were trying to stifle their chuckles, and failing, and over it all Ned could hear King Robert laughing, louder than anyone. Finally, they had to lead the Lion of Lannister off to a blacksmith, blind and stumbling. By then, Sir Gregor Clegane was in position at the head of the lists. He was huge, the biggest man that Eddard Stark had ever seen. Robert Baratheon and his brothers were all big men, as was the Hound, and back at Winterfell there was a simple-minded stable-boy named Hoder who dwarfed them all, but the knight they called the Mountain That Rides would have towered over Hoder. He was well over 7 feet tall, closer to 8, with massive shoulders and arms thick as the trunks of small trees. His destrier seemed a pony in between his armored legs, and the lance he carried looked as small as a broom handle. Unlike his brother, Sir Gregor did not live at court. He was a solitary man who seldom left his own lands but for wars and tourneys. He had been with Lord Tywin when King's Landing fell, a new-made knight of 17 years, even then distinguished by his size and his implacable ferocity. Some said it had been Gregor who dashed the skull of the infant Prince Aegon Targaryen against the wall, and whispered that afterward he had raped the mother, the Dornish princess Elia, before putting her to the sword. These things were not said in Gregor's hearing. Ned Stark could not recall ever speaking to the man, though Gregor had ridden with them during Balon Greyjoy's rebellion, one night among thousands. He watched him with disquiet. Ned seldom put much stock in gossip, but the things said of Sir Gregor were more than ominous. He was soon to be married for the 3rd time, and one heard dark whisperings about the deaths of his first 2 wives. It was said that his keep was a grim place, where servants disappeared unaccountably, and even the dogs were afraid to enter the hall. And there had been a sister who had died young under queer circumstances, and the fire that had disfigured his brother, and the hunting accident that had killed their father. Gregor had inherited the keep, the gold, and the family estates. His younger brother Sandor had left the same day to take service with the Lannisters as a sworn sword, and it was said that he had never returned, not even to visit. When the Knight of Flowers made his entrance, a murmur ran through the crowd, and he heard Sansa's fervent whisper. "Oh, he's so beautiful." Sir Loras Tyrell was slender as a reed, dressed in a suit of fabulous silver armor, polished to a blinding sheen and filigreed with twining black vines and tiny blue forget-me-nots. The commons realized in the same instant as Ned that the blue of the flowers came from sapphires. A gasp went up from 1,000 throats. Across the boy's shoulders his cloak hung heavy. It was woven of forget-me-nots, real ones, hundreds of fresh blooms sewn to a heavy woolen cape. His courser was as slim as her rider, a beautiful grey mare built for speed. Sir Gregor's huge stallion trumpeted as he caught her scent. The boy from Highgarden did something with his legs, and his horse pranked sideways, nimble as a dancer. Sansa clutched at his arm. "Father, don't let Sir Gregor hurt him," she said. Ned saw she was wearing the rose that Sir Loras had given her yesterday. Jory had told him about that as well. "These are tourney lances," he told his daughter. "They make them to splinter on impact so no one is hurt." Yet he remembered the dead boy in the cart with his cloak of crescent moons, and the words were raw in his throat. Sir Gregor was having trouble controlling his horse. The stallion was screaming and pawing the ground, shaking his head. The mountain kicked at the animal savagely with an armored boot. The horse reared and almost threw him. The Knight of Flowers saluted the king, rode to the far end of the list and couched his lance, ready. Sir Gregor brought his animal to the line, fighting with the reins. And suddenly it began. The mountain stallion broke in a hard gallop, plunging forward wildly, while the mare charged as smooth as a flow of silk. Sir Gregor wrenched his shield into position, juggled with his lance, and all the while fought to hold his unruly mount on a straight line, and suddenly Loras Tyrell was on him, placing the point of his lance just there, and in an eye blink the mountain was falling. He was so huge that he took his horse down with him in a tangle of steel and flesh. Ned heard applause, cheers, whistles, shocked gasps, excited muttering, and over it all the rasping, raucous laughter of the hound. The Knight of Flowers reined up at the end of the list. His lance was not even broken. His sapphires winked in the sun as he raised his visor, smiling. The commons went mad for him. In the middle of the field, Sir Gregor Clegane disentangled himself and came boiling to his feet. He wrenched off his helm and slammed it down onto the ground. His face was dark with fury, and his hair fell down into his eyes. "My sword!" he shouted to his squire, and the boy ran it out to him. By then his stallion was back on its feet as well. Gregor Clegane killed the horse with a single blow of such ferocity that it half severed the animal's neck. Cheers turned to shrieks in a heartbeat. The stallion went to its knees, screaming as it died. By then Gregor was striding down the lists towards Sir Loras Tyrell, his bloody sword clutched in his fist.
"Stop him!"
Ned shouted, but his words were lost in the roar. Everyone else was yelling as well, and Sansa was crying. It all happened so fast. The Knight of Flowers was shouting for his own sword as Sir Gregor knocked his squire aside and made a grab for the reins of his horse. The mare scented blood and reared. Loras Tyrell kept his seat, but barely. Sir Gregor swung his sword, a savage two-handed blow that took the boy in the chest and knocked him from the saddle. The courser dashed away in panic as Sir Loras lay stunned in the dirt. But as Gregor lifted his sword for the killing blow, a rasping voice warned, "Leave him be!" and a steel-clad hand wrenched him away from the boy. The mountain pivoted in wordless fury, swinging his long sword in a killing arc with all his massive strength behind it, but the hound caught the blow and turned it, and for what seemed an eternity, the two brothers stood hammering at each other as the dazed Loras Tyrell was helped to safety. Thrice Ned saw Sir Gregor aim savage blows at the hound's head helmet, yet not once did Sanders send a cut at his brother's unprotected face. It was the king's voice that put an end to it. The king's voice and 20 swords. Jon Arryn had told them that a commander needs a good battlefield voice, and Robert had proved the truth of that on the Trident. He used that voice now. "Stop this madness!" he boomed. "In the name of your king!" The hound went to one knee. Sir Gregor's blow cut air, and at last he came to his senses. He dropped his sword and glared at Robert, surrounded by his Kingsguard and a dozen other knights and guardsmen. Wordlessly, he turned and strode off, shoving past Barristan Selmy. "Let him go," Robert said, and as quickly as that, it was over. "Is the hound the champion now?" Sansa asked Ned.
"No," he told her. "There will be one final joust between the hound and the Knight of Flowers."
But Sansa had the right of it after all. A few moments later, Sir Loras Tyrell walked back onto the field in a simple linen doublet and said to Sandor Clegane, "I owe you my life. The day is yours, sir."
"I am no sir,"
the hound replied, but he took the victory and the champion's purse and, for perhaps the first time in his life, the love of the commons. They cheered him as he left the lists to return to his pavilion. As Ned walked with Sansa to the archery field, Littlefinger and Lord Renly and some of the others fell in with them. "Tyrell had to know the mare was in heat," Littlefinger was saying. "I swear the boy planned the whole thing. Gregor's always favored huge, ill-tempered stallions with more spirit than sense." The notion seemed to amuse him. It did not amuse Sir Barristan Selmy.
"There is small honor in tricks,"
the old man said stiffly.
"Small honor in 20,000 goals,"
Lord Renly smiled. That afternoon, a boy named Anguy, an unheralded commoner from the Dornish marches, won the archery competition, out-shooting Sir Balon Swan and Jarlaback So at 100 paces after all the other bowmen had been eliminated at the short distances. Ned sent Alyn to seek him out and offer him a position with the Hand's Guard, but the boy was flush with wine and victory and riches undreamed of, and he refused. The melee went on for 3 hours. Near 40 men took part, free riders and hedge knights, and new-made squires in search of a reputation. They fought with blunted weapons in a chaos of mud and blood, small troops fighting together and then turning on each other as alliances formed and fractured, until only one man was left standing. The victor was the Red Priest, Taurus of Myr, a madman who shaved his head and fought with a flaming sword. He had won Melees before. The fire sword frightened the mounts of the other riders, and nothing frightened Taurus. The final tally was 3 broken limbs, a shattered collarbone, a dozen smashed fingers, 2 horses that had to be put down, and more cuts, sprains, and bruises than anyone cared to count. Ned was desperately pleased that Robert had not taken part. That night at the feast, Eddard Stark was more hopeful than he had been in a great while. Robert was in high good humor, the Lannisters were nowhere to be seen, and even his daughters were behaving. Jory brought Arya down to join them, and Sansa spoke to her sister pleasantly. "The tournament was magnificent," she sighed. "You should have come. How was your dancing?" "I'm sore all over," Arya reported happily, proudly displaying a huge purple bruise on her leg. "You must be a terrible dancer," Sansa said doubtfully. Later, while Sansa was off listening to a troupe of singers perform the complex round of interwoven ballads called the Dance of the Dragons, Ned inspected the bruise himself.
"I hope Forel is not being too hard on you,"
he said. Arya stood on one leg. She was getting much better at that of late. "Syrio says that every hurt is a lesson, and every lesson makes you better." Ned frowned. The man Syrio Forel had come with an excellent reputation, and his flamboyant bravosy style was well suited to Arya's slender blade, yet still. A few days ago she had been wandering around with a swatch of black silk tied over her eyes. Syrio was teaching her to see with her ears and her nose and her skin, she told him. Before that he had her doing spins and backflips.
"Arya, are you certain you want to persist in this?"
She nodded. "Tomorrow we're going to catch cats."
"Cats,"
Ned sighed.
"Perhaps it was a mistake to hire this Braavosi. If you like, I will ask Jory to take over your lessons, or I might have a quiet word with Sir Barristan. He was the finest sword in the 7 Kingdoms in his youth."
"I don't want him," Arya said. "I want Syrio." Ned ran his fingers through his hair. Any decent master-at-arms could give Arya the rudiments of slash and parry without his nonsense of blindfolds, cartwheels, and hopping about on one leg. But he knew his youngest daughter well enough to know there was no arguing with that stubborn jut of jaw.
"As you wish,"
he said. Surely she would grow tired of this soon.
"Try to be careful."
"I will," she promised solemnly as she hopped smoothly from her right leg to her left. Much later, after he had taken the girls back through the city and seen them both safe in bed, Sansa with her dreams and Arya with her bruises, Ned ascended to his own chambers atop the Tower of the Hand. The day had been warm and the room was close and stuffy. Ned went to the window and unfastened the heavy shutters to let in the cool night air. Across the great yard, he noticed the flickering glow of candle light from Littlefinger's windows. The hour was well past midnight. Down by the river, the revels were only now beginning to dwindle and die. He took out the dagger and studied it. Littlefinger's blade, won by Tyrion Lannister in a tourney wager, sent to slay Bran in his sleep. Why? Why would the dwarf want Bran dead? Why would anyone want Bran dead? The dagger, Bran's fall, all of it was linked somehow to the murder of Jon Arryn. He could feel it in his gut. But the truth of Jon's death remained as clouded to him as when he had started. Lord Stannis had not returned to King's Landing for the tourney. Lysa Arryn held her silence behind the high walls of the Eyrie. The squire was dead, and Jory was still searching the whorehouses. What did he have but Robert's bastard? That the amorous sullen apprentice was the king's son, Ned had no doubt. The Baratheon look was stamped on his face, in his jaw, his eyes, that black hair. Renly was too young to have fathered a boy of that age. Stannis too cold and proud in his honor. Gendry had to be Robert's. Yet knowing all that, what had he learned? The king had other base-born children scattered throughout the 7 Kingdoms. He had openly acknowledged one of his bastards, a boy of Bran's age whose mother was high-born. The lad was being fostered by Lord Renly's castellan at Storm's End. Ned remembered Robert's first child as well, a daughter born in the Vale when Robert was scarcely more than a boy himself. A sweet little girl. The young lord of Storm's End had doted on her. He used to make daily visits to play with the babe, long after he had lost interest in the mother. Ned was often dragged along for company, whether he willed it or not. The girl would be 17 or 18 now, he realized. Older than Robert had been when he fathered her. A strange thought. Cersei could not have been pleased by her lord husband's by-blows, yet in the end it mattered little whether the king had 1 bastard or 100. Law and custom gave the baseborn few rights. Gendry, the girl in the Vale, the boy at Storm's End, none of them could threaten Robert's true-born children. His musings were ended by a soft rap on his door. "A man to see you, my lord," Harwin called. "He will not give his name." "Send him in," Ned said, wondering. The visitor was a stout man in cracked, mud-caked boots and a heavy brown robe of the coarsest roughspun, his features hidden by a cowl, his hands drawn up into voluminous sleeves. "Who are you?" Ned asked. "A friend," the cowled man said in a strange low voice. "We must speak alone, Lord Stark." Curiosity was stronger than caution. "Harwin, leave us," he commanded. Not until they were alone behind closed doors did his visitor draw back his cowl. "Lord Varys?" Ned said in astonishment. "Lord Stark," Varys said politely, seating himself. "I wonder if I might trouble you for a drink." Ned filled 2 cups with some wine and handed one to Varys. "I might have passed within a foot of you and never recognized you," he said, incredulous. He had never seen the eunuch dressed in anything but silk and velvet and the richest damasks, and this man smelled of sweat instead of lilacs. "That was my dearest hope," Varys said. "It would not do if certain people learned that we had spoken in private. The Queen watches you closely. This wine is very choice. Thank you." "How did you get past my other guards?" Ned asked. Porter and Kane had been posted outside the tower, and Alan on the stairs. "Turret Keep has ways known only to ghosts and spiders." Varys smiled apologetically. "I will not keep you long, my lord. There are things you must know. You're the king's hand, and the king is a fool." The eunuch's cloying tones were gone. Now his voice was thin and sharp as a whip. "Your friend, I know, yet a fool nonetheless. And doomed, unless you save him. Today was a near thing. They had hoped to kill him during the melee." For a moment Ned was speechless with shock. "Who?" Varys sipped his wine. "If I truly need to tell you that, you're a bigger fool than Robert, and I am on the wrong side." "The Lannisters," Ned said. "The Queen. No, I will not believe that, not even of Cersei. She asked him not to fight. She forbade him to fight in front of his brother, his knights, and half the court. Tell me truly, do you know any surer way to force King Robert into the melee? I ask you." Ned had a sick feeling in his gut. The eunuch had hit upon a truth. Tell Robert Baratheon he could not, should not, or must not do a thing, and it was as good as done. "Even if he'd fought, who would have dared to strike the king?" Varys shrugged. "There were 40 riders in the melee. The Lannisters have many friends. Amidst all that chaos, with horses screaming and bones breaking, and Torres of Myr waving that absurd fire sword of his, who could name it murder if some chance blow felled his grace?" He went to the flagon and refilled his cup. "After the deed was done, the slayer would be beside himself with grief. I can almost hear him weeping. So sad. Yet no doubt the gracious and compassionate widow would take pity, lift the poor unfortunate to his feet, and bless him with a gentle kiss of forgiveness. Good King Joffrey would have no choice but to pardon him." The eunuch stroked his cheek. "Or perhaps Cersei would let Sir Ilyn strike off his head. Less risk for the Lannisters that way, though quite an unpleasant surprise for the little friend." Ned felt his anger rise. "You knew of this plot, and yet you did nothing. I command whisperers, not warriors. You might have come to me earlier. Oh yes, I confess it. And you would have rushed straight to the king, yes? And when Robert heard of his peril, what would he have done? I wonder." Ned considered that. "He would have damned them all and fought anyway, to show he did not fear them." Varys spat his hands. "I will make another confession, Lord Eddard. I was curious to see what you would do. Why not come to me, you ask, and I must answer. Why, because I do not trust you, my lord." "You did not trust me?" Ned was frankly astonished. The Red Keep shelters two sorts of people, Lord Eddard, Varys said. Those who are loyal to the realm, and those who are loyal only to themselves. Until this morning I could not say which you might be, so I waited to see, and now I know for a certainty. He smiled a plump, tight little smile, and for a moment his private face and public mask were gone. I begin to comprehend why the Queen fears you so much. Oh, yes, I do.
You are the one she ought to fear,
Ned said.
No, I am what I am. The king makes use of me, but it shames him. A most puissant warrior is our Robert, and such a manly man has little love for sneaks and spies and eunuchs. If a day should come when Cersei whispers, "Kill that man," Ilyn Payne will snick my head off in a twinkling, and who will mourn poor Varys then? North or south, they sing no songs for spiders.
He reached out and touched Ned with a soft hand.
But you, Lord Stark, I think, no, I know. He would not kill you, not even for his queen, and there may lie our salvation.
It was all too much. For a moment Eddard Stark wanted nothing so much as to return to Winterfell, to the clean simplicity of the north, where the enemies were winter and the wildlings beyond the wall.
Surely Robert has other loyal friends, he protested. His brothers, his
wife, Varys finished with a smile that cut.
His brothers hate the Lannisters, true enough, but hating the Queen and loving the King are not quite the same thing, are they? Sir Barristan loves his honor, Grandmaster Pycelle loves his office, and Littlefinger loves Littlefinger.
The Kingsguard.
A paper shield, the eunuch said. Try not to look so shocked, Lord Stark. Jaime Lannister is himself a sworn brother of the White Swords, and we all know what his oath is worth. The days when men like Riam Redwine and Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight wore the white cloak are gone to dust and song. Of these 7, only Sir Barristan's Selmy is made of the true steel, and Selmy is old. Sir Boros and Sir Meryn are the Queen's creatures to the bone, and I have deep suspicions of the others. No, my lord, when the swords come out in earnest, you will be the only true friend Robert Baratheon will have.
Robert must be told, Ned said.
If what you say is true, if even a part of it is true, the king must hear it for himself. And what proof shall we lay before him? My words against theirs? My little birds against the Queen and the Kingslayer, against his brothers and his council, against the wardens of East and West, against all the might of Casterly Rock? Pray, send for Sir Ilyn directly, it will save us all some time. I know where the road ends. Yet if what you say is true, they will only bide their time and make another attempt. Indeed they will, said Varys. And sooner rather than later, I do fear. You are making them most anxious, Lord Eddard. But my little birds will be listening, and together we may be able to forestall them, you and I. He rose and pulled up his cowl so his face was hidden once more. Thank you for the wine. We will speak again. When you see me next at council, be certain to treat me with your accustomed contempt. You should not find it difficult.
He was at the door when Ned called.
Varys.
The eunuch turned back.
How did Jon Arryn die?
I wondered when you would get around to that.
Tell me.
The Tears of Lys, they call it. A rare and costly thing, clear and sweet as water, and it leaves no trace. I begged Lord Arryn to use a taster. In this very room I begged him, but he would not hear of it. Only one who was less than a man would even think of such a thing, he told me. Ned had to know the rest.
Who gave him the poison?
Some dear, sweet friend who often shared meat and mead with him, no doubt. Oh, but which one? There were many such. Lord Arryn was a kindly, trusting man. The eunuch sighed. There was one boy. All he owed Jon Arryn, but when the widow fled to the Eyrie with her household, he stayed in King's Landing and prospered. It always gladdens my heart to see the young rise in the world. The whip was in his voice again, every word a stroke. He must have cut a gallant figure in the tourney, him in his bright new armor, with those crescent moons on his cloak. A pity he died so untimely, before you could talk to him. Ned felt half poisoned himself.
The squire, he said. Sir Hugh.
Wheels within wheels within wheels. Ned's head was pounding.
Why? Why now? Jon Arryn had been hanged for 14 years. What was he doing that they had to kill him?"
"Asking questions," Varys said, slipping out the door.